Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. Junin Hitaki, the Sandaime said when Kakashi entered his office a mere 30 minutes late. Kakashi raised his gaze from his book and put it into his vest, giving an almost insultingly casual bow as he said, Hokage-sama. But they both knew his true show of respect was in remaining so relaxed and putting his book away. You are due to test a Genin team tomorrow. Team 7 this time. I trust you are aware of the members. Naturally. Hokage-sama. Good. I do not need to tell you to give them a real chance. The Sandaime raised a loaded brow as he lit his pipe. All my teams have an equal chance. They simply fail to take it, Kakashi replied laconically, both of them knowing what that surface-compliant statement meant. I have been asked to pass on the council's high expectations for this group. They trust a Team 7 will join the ranks tomorrow. Though I know it is foolish, I also hope that these three will prove themselves. I see Hokage-sama. I hear and obey you, Hokage-sama. Kakashi I smiled before bowing again at the quick dismissal. Back in his office, the Sandaime watched him go with regret. Naruto would be crushed at having to go back to the academy, even after all this, but shinobi like Hitaki Kakashi did not take well to the idea a half-civilian council had any say in shinobi matters. Nor did he, for that matter. Asterisk 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 page break asterisk. Kakashi eyed the waiting trio from under his concealment jutsu. He had been disappointed yesterday. It was like a fractured mirror of the old Team 7 and there was no way they would pass. But that was probably just as well. He was no Minato-sensei and had failed his teammates enough as it was. No need to drag down three innocent genin with his curse. Now, though, he was grimly content with the team's intractable nature. When the Hokage had called him to his office yesterday, he had expected a semi-subtle guilt trip to get him to more seriously consider passing the brats. He had not expected the revelation that the council was completely overstepping their bounds, or the tacit permission of the Hokage to completely disregard those out-of-line orders. This team's complete failure to mesh only made their rejection legitimate enough he couldn't even be reprimanded for it. Dropping the jutsu, he strolled over with 2 lunches, a clock and 2 bells, grinning under his mask at the so-sweet shrieks, "You're late." Sorry brats, he thought as he gleefully explained just how they were going down, it's for the best. Immediately after the exam, of all the cursed luck, Kakashi swore mentally as he walked away from a tied-up Naruto. He needed to report to the Hokage, after he told Minato-sensei about his son passing and figured out how the hell he was going to do this. Minato-sensei, he greeted, standing on the Yondaime's head, very aware this was Naruto's favorite spot for hard thinking. He had been an Anbu watcher for years after all. So the brats passed, legitimately, Kakashi grimaced, so now the civilians are going to think they have power over the internal workings of the shinobi forces, because no one is going to believe those three passed a teamwork test, not as is. Hitaki Kakashi stared out over his village, mind jumping in a million different directions as he let his full genius bear down on the problem at hand. The solution he came up with was easy in concept but execution was a whole different batch of kunai. Handling this was going to be a lot of work, and if anything, it was a good thing 2 of the 3 had only the bare basics, because he'd be building them from the ground up. They wouldn't pass a teamwork test as is. Fine. He would make them the definition of teamwork. Thanks sensei, he said aloud, turning to leave, pray for your son. He'll be needing it before I'm through with him. Asterisk 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 page break asterisk asterisk asterisk. Good morning Mina-san. Kakashi beamed exaggeratedly at his next project. You're On time. Naruto blinked at him, the other two equally confused and surprised but unwilling to admit it. Don't get used to it, Kakashi chirped. Now listen closely, little ducklings. You are caught in a political tug of war and will be torn apart, probably one of you dead by the end of the year, so shut up and listen. Naruto opened his mouth, probably to shout something, but Sakura slapped a hand over his mouth, eyes wide as she stared at Kakashi. Sasuke tried to act nonchalant, but he had obviously tensed at the statement. Good. It'd be up to the next bit to sell it to them all. Good. You can learn. Kakashi let his merry tone drop as he stared down at the genin sitting on the bridge. You should all be aware that though the Hokage has final word on all decisions, there is a council made up evenly of civilians elected in and shinobi, most also clan heads, which assists and advises him. Unless the Hokage wants to have to micromanage everything, which, I assure you, he does not, he must allow the council some word in his decisions. This results in situations like the one you now face. Certain parties on the council believe they have the right to manage the internal workings of the shinobi forces, which they do not. Unfortunately, due to your little last-minute team effort, entirely unintentional I am sure, you have strengthened this belief. Naruto was staring with wide eyes, Sakura's hand still clamped over his mouth. Sasuke was about to speak, but Kakashi silenced him with a look, continuing, I have never passed a team, because none of the teams I have been assigned have acted as a team. This means when I was assigned you, the council assumed I would fail you as well. They decided to pass on the extremely strong suggestion that I pass you no matter your ability to work as a team. They wanted you to cheat? Sakura asked, aghast, but flushed at Sasuke's withering look. Kakashi cut the boy a sharp glance even though he agreed with the sentiment. They wanted me to pass a subpar team for no reason besides their fan crushes on the idea of an Uchiha in the shinobi forces again, Kakashi said bluntly. Naruto was waving his hand in the air frantically and Kakashi sighed, yes Naruto. Sakura removed her hand as the boy burst, but we did pass, Dadbao. We worked as a team. I know. But no one else does and no one else believes because that was an isolated coincidental incident. Your teamwork is deplorable. Deplora what? Naruto asked, confusion clear. It's, Kakashi said flatly. Well maybe if Sasuke-tem wasn't such an arrogant. Well maybe if you weren't such a moron. Don't insult Sasuke-kun. Guess I'll start on your eulogies then. Kakashi cut in happily. How's? They died as they lived, in ignorance. They all shut up and Kakashi took a moment to enjoy the silence. Much better, he said happily. Now I don't like giving certain people the idea they can control the Hokage's commands to his shinobi. It's wrong, stupid and annoying. Yeah, no one's the boss of the old man. Naruto shouted, Sakura slapping her hand over his mouth again. So I get to prove that you three can do teamwork and can do it well. Because if you don't, the council will think they can jerk us around as they please and you will be torn apart by it. Kakashi's smile was a tooth-filled thing that carried to his eye as predatory glee, sending a shiver down his students' spines. Welcome to hell, brats. Right. So, here you go. Kakashi beamed at the disgruntled genin, all of them glaring at him from where they were tied up in a clearing somewhere in the forest of death. I'll be back in a couple days. Don't die now. Day 3. These are edible, right Sakura-chan? Naruto cheered, holding out a handful of plants to the grimacing girl. They'd been dropped off in this weird forest with giant monster bugs and animals 2 days ago with only what they'd had on them the day of their second meeting. Sasuke had stormed off to find a way out, Sakura following him but getting waylaid by a giant centipede. Naruto had burst in screaming about how he was going to defend his precious Sakura-chan, killed the centipede by luck, and had, after some shouting, helped dress Sakura's injuries with medicinal herbs she pointed out and fabric from his bright orange jacket. Yeah, those are good, she frowned, taking the reeds. I can strip off the rough dermis and we can eat the softer core. Between them and the pine nut stash we found, we should be okay for today and tomorrow, especially with the stream. Woohoo! You're so smart, Sakura-chan. How do you know all these things? Naruto beamed at her and she groaned, can you be a little quieter, Baka? We don't need more of those giant bugs coming after us. Oh, sorry, he whispered exaggeratedly, the sound probably carrying just as far. Sakura just sighed and slumped, wishing her Sasuke-kun had stuck around. Day 4. Sasuke-kun. HN. Haha. Look who's stuck in a tree. How long you been stuck there? Huh. Well, guess what? I saved Sakura-chan and we've had plenty of food. Jerk. Stop insulting him, Baka. Hey, he ditched you and didn't try to help with the centipede thing. Why are you defending him? Because he's Sasuke-kun. Now get him down. TCH. Fine. Crazy woman. You take that back. Day 5. Gah. Why are you being so stupid? What are you talking about? I'm just patrolling. Loudly enough anyone can hear you a mile away, Baka. Shut up, TEME. Shut up, both of you. Quote, Naruto. Stop being so loud, we can hear you just fine, and so can anything else in the blasted forest. Sasuke, stop being so rude, he's at least making an effort. If you don't want to be with the group so bad, then just leave. Hiding in the trees above them, basically sitting there with a low-level genjutsu on, more for his own peace of mind than any worry over them actually detecting him, Kakashi was pleasantly surprised. Who'd have expected her to snap out of it so fast? Nothing like being abandoned to possible death by a love interest to squash that particular fantasy. Day 6. I can't take it anymore. Sakura. Seriously. Eat the meat. Naruto had found a group of bug larvae he'd eaten before, in one of his more adventurous escapades, and even had whined Sasuke into lighting a fire with a jutsu to cook them. Heck, Sasuke even found some herbs Sakura recognized as cooking seasonings, so they tasted great. Texture was a bit weird, but they were pretty good and great with those reeds he kept finding everywhere. And Sakura was just turning up her nose at it. It's disgusting. It's protein. Naruto nearly wailed, barely remembering to keep his voice somewhat down. You can barely walk the whole day, Sakura-chan. You have like zero energy. Eat it. Why are we walking? Sasuke asked abruptly, looking up from his larva steak. To get the hell out of MMPFH. Sakura began, before Naruto shoved a chunk of cooked larva in her mouth, which she refused to spit out, so she glared mutely as she chewed. Yeah, but we have no idea where we're supposed to be going to get out. This place goes on forever, the Uchiha said, surprising them both with fully articulated sentences. We should just find a water source, like that river a day's walk back, and walk along it till we find a securable area. Set up a base camp or something. Huh, that's pretty smart, Tem. Says the class idiot. Hey, who got dinner? Huh, don't see you complaining about those pranks and adventures when you're eating the rewards. Day 7. We're here. Naruto beamed, Sakura mumbling from where she was draped over Naruto's shoulder, having been exhausted after half a day's walk. Hey Tem, we made it. Yeah, I think someone in Kumo didn't hear you. Sasuke growled, it's too muddy here. Let's go further downstream and find someplace solid. We could always just hide in trees, these things are huge. Naruto pointed out. And we'll climb them that high, how exactly? Oh, that's easy. Just use your kunai. Huh. Day 8. Kakashi was pleasantly surprised. They were all alive. And not only that, they were reasonably codependent. Naruto and Sasuke had built a reasonable shelter, Sakura had been reasonably treated and was identifying edible and non-edible plants regularly, as well as having them collect medical herbs against future use. They seemed to have found some regular food sources, in larvae and fish. Good. Good progress for their first week. Now for some actual training. Up an ATM. Kakashi roared, all of them jumping, the two sleeping genin squawking in shock as they jerked awake. He had already healed Sakura's injuries as she was awake and on watch, the girl failing to alert them when she recognized him. He'd have to cure her of that, but for now it was convenient. Right. So, you lived. I'm pleasantly surprised. He scowled down at them. Now that you've shown you're not completely useless, I can proceed to demonstrate how inequitably useless you are. Sakura. Run from here to the river and back, then keep doing it until I say you can stop. She opened her mouth to object, but his glare silenced her and she mutely took off for the river again. Sasuke, climb that tree by pumping chakra into your feet and sticking. Too much, you blast off and blow holes in the tree. Too little, you fall. For every hole you put in that tree, you do 21-handed push-ups. He didn't even attempt to object, just going to stare at a tree as he figured out how he was going to do this. Naruto. Run through your taijutsu katas. They and I will fix them. By the time the sun rose, Sakura had dropped from exhaustion and only managed to weakly drag herself around the clearing to cool her muscles down. Sasuke had made it halfway up the tree and done so many push-ups his arms wouldn't twitch without extreme effort, and Naruto had finally gotten the first two katas down in the correct form. Sakura, Kakashi barked, the pink-haired girl jumping at his tone, and he smirked, you get to practice stamina this time. Run as much as you can, every day. None of this carrying you nonsense that was going on this week. You walk there yourself or you don't get there. Clear. Good. Sasuke. You'd best be getting to the top of those trees by the next time I show up. And who knows? It might be tomorrow night. So get practicing. Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke both know these katas. Sakura in technique, Sasuke in practice. By the time I get back, you'd best be able to run through the entire academy sequence with no errors at full speed. Again, it might be as soon as tomorrow. Now, good work kids. You're making progress. Kakashi beamed before vanishing, leaving a gaping trio of genin in a slowly sunlit clearing. He wasn't a complete though. He did leave them some ration bars. Day 11. We are so lucky Kakashi-sensei didn't come back yet. Sakura groaned as Naruto tangled his feet together and face-planted running through the final kata, again. This clearly isn't working. Sasuke grunted, hey, Dobi, spar with me. I'll use academy style too, maybe if you actually see how the proper style works better than whatever the hell you're doing, it'll sink in. And I'm next. Sakura insisted, sparring's a different way to train stamina, right? Maybe you should try that tree thing Sasuke was doing, Naruto recommended, you're really smart, maybe you'll have some ideas how he can get higher, or I can even stick. Good idea, she acknowledged reluctantly, going to stare at a tree for a while. Day 13. Huh, you did it. Naruto cheered, you got to the top. That's awesome. And I got through those katas. At 3/4 speed, Sakura refuted from her perch on a tree near Sasuke's recent victory. So go through them again, and faster. Then we'll spar. I'll keep climbing this tree. Make sure it's not a once-off, Sasuke stated, starting his slow walk back down, Sakura racing down easily to join Naruto on the ground. Kakashi rubbed his hands together in glee, they were coming together nicely. What should he give them to chew on next? Day 15. So, you don't as badly anymore, he informed the newly exhausted group after he tested them all on their recent progress, in all fields he'd assigned, naturally, as the lesson was teamwork. Have some chocolate. I love you. Sakura blurted as she stared at the chocolate bar in her hand, before flushing brilliantly at the confused looks the boys shot her and glaring. They quickly turned back to their sensei and decided to not question it. Ma, you have very low standards, Sakura-chan. Now, for the next sessions. Naruto, good job on the taijutsu. Keep practicing it in spars, your bad habits come through. The Academy Taijutsu is a good basis, we'll develop one more suited to you from those building blocks later on. For now, that will have to do. Sasuke, good on the trees, nice initiative with the jumping and sparring on tree branches, though I suspect Naruto had more to do with that particular development. Keep it up and work on the next stage, which is walking on water. Similar principle. Have it. Sakura, keep working on your stamina and keep up the tree walking and water walking. They build up chakra reserves, and yours are pitiful. You have 3 days to make significant progress. If I'm not satisfied, I sick one of those giant tigers on you. Clear. Day 18. Adequate, I suppose, Kakashi shrugged, all three slumping with relief at his declaration. Keep at the water walking, all of you. Naruto, good initiative on the traps. You get to teach these two a trap each, different for each one, and they have to set it independently before my next visit, which could be tomorrow, could be a few days. You decide what you'll risk for time, because you also need to master water walking to spar on it like Sakura and Sasuke, and straighten out the last bit of your taijutsu. By now, he was reasonably content with the fact it only took Naruto until that evening to figure out shadow clones could teach too. When Sakura got frustrated with hers and dispelled it, Naruto fell through the water he was wobbling on and came up spluttering his own insults, which, after some amusing shouting and dramatic arm waving, drew the three to the realization shadow clones could relay information to their originator. He even came up with more clones for water walking himself. If he realized that they really helped in chakra control because of their nature as constructs of chakra, or if he just thought learning was learning, whatever worked remained to be seen, but he would count it as a win for this session. Hitaki, Anko asked, raising an eyebrow at him. Shouldn't you be monitoring your brats? A clone is, he waved off idly, cup of warm sake in hand. Can't stay out there all the time, you know, it's not like I am the one trying to be whipped into shape. She just snorted, knowing very well his personal training regimes were, while not quite on the order of Guy's self-improvement efforts, quite demanding. Well, you're going to want to be attending to those kiddos personally, and soon, she informed him, because we've got an escapee that was heading that way. Escapee? Kakashi raised his one visible eyebrow, an actual one or a hope-crushing gambit? Actual, unfortunately, Anko grimaced, I'm about to head out and hunt, just wanted to give you a heads up. Right, thanks Anko. Kakashi shot back the rest of his sake, mourning its wasted quality as he tossed his payment onto the bar and vanished out the door. He wasn't too concerned. His clone could at least delay things or lead the escapee away, but it wasn't a good idea to just leave them out there unobserved with a threat like that in the offing. He wanted them to get their act together, not kill them. It had been just about 3 weeks, they'd made decent progress and at least could tolerate each other, so he'd probably be pulling them out of the forest soon and getting them onto a strict training regime. Of course, the last time he'd designed a training regime, it had been for introductory Anbu soldiers and reintegration training for long-term undercover agents, so he'd have to wait and see just what he could come up with for Genin. Meh, they'd live. Naruto was terrified. He didn't show it, he was good at that, but he was genuinely terrified. First they had passed, miracle of miracles, then Kakashi-sensei had told them that people, powerful people, wanted them dead. He may not be the sharpest kunai in the drawer, but he knew that of the three of them, he was the one that was the most disposable. Sasuke was an Uchiha, the last one in the village, so he'd be a priority for the powerful people here. Sakura, while from a civilian background, was the top of their class, and relations between shinobi and civilians could get rough, so her being on a power team like this was a big bonus on that front. Then there was him. Dead last demon container. If they got sent on missions that were just too hard for them, that they weren't ready for, he'd be more likely to live because he could heal really fast. But if he survived a mission that killed Sakura-chan or, Kami forbid, Sasuke-tem, he didn't think he'd last very long. That didn't even take into account their past weeks in this freaking awesomely cool yet scary forest. He'd saved Sakura-chan from a giant centipede, for all the gratitude he got, and she'd been super smart and helped find edible plants so they wouldn't be too hungry. He missed ramen so much, but then Sasuke-tem had gotten stuck and he'd had to fish him out of a tree too. He'd only grudgingly admit this in his head, and never aloud, but the Uchiha was more use than Sakura-chan, edible plant knowledge or no. Then randomly their Oni of a sensei, but he'd at least been honest and was trying, and Naruto really didn't want to think about that too hard, showed up and started teaching them all something. Well, him and Sasuke something, he just made Sakura-chan run a lot, she needed it. And they'd managed to meet his requirements the first few times, by a miracle, really, which made Naruto wonder if their sensei was spying on them, to make sure they always just passed and just finished, so they'd always feel that pressure. He didn't doubt that if they started slacking, the man would show up and they'd regret it forever. So he'd taught them traps. Gotten good at water walking, sent clones out to search for food and an exit now that he knew they could give him memories, and they might even impress Sensei enough to get ramen. He'd brought chocolate, right? So there was some hope. Sasuke and Sakura were both working at building traps around the campsite, though none of them really thought their sensei would get caught in them. It was worth a shot, right? Besides, they had been told they needed to learn, so learn they would. Anything to hopefully bribe their way out of here and to a shower, real bed, and ramen. Man, he needed to stop thinking about ramen. He was trying to do katas on water and needed his concentra. Knife to throat, who the hell, what, just not Konoha, not Konoha, not Konoha. Naruto flailed in the water and spluttered, shouting in dismay before he managed to clench his jaw shut and scramble for shore. He needed to get to the others. Sopping wet, he left his bright orange jacket, dirty and cut up for bandages, as it was on the shoreline and ran for the campsite. Guys, he called, trying to keep his voice down but needing to find them fast, nearly shouting in relief when he spotted a head of pink hair building a foot snare. Sakura-chan, he hissed, the girl looking up and blinking at him. Naruto. She asked, what's wrong now? One of my clones just got slaughtered by some foreign nin. Naruto hissed, wide-eyed, where's Sasuke-tem? We need to arm the traps and get into some trees. If it were just him and Sasuke, he'd try and go for the foreign nin, probably. He'd at least spam clones and send them after him, but with Sakura-chan here, and with them not having eaten or slept really well for a while, no new supplies forthcoming, it'd be better to hide and wait. If Kakashi-sensei was watching like he thought, knew, hoped, whatever, then he'd be here soon and they'd be able to just wait. Right, she nodded, wide-eyed as well, quickly covering up her snare and darting over to where Sasuke and another clone were insulting each other over their work. Shish, she hissed, there's a foreign nin in here that just killed Naruto's clone. We need to hide. Sasuke just raised an eyebrow at Naruto, who nodded in confirmation, dread settling in his gut when he recognized that arrogant smirk. Shit, the Tem thought he could go deal with this guy himself. Damn it. Naruto was tempted too, but they couldn't just ditch Sakura to go find this guy. Odds were they'd miss him and Sakura would face him alone. What direction is he coming from? Sasuke demanded, and Naruto narrowed his eyes before shaking his head. Not telling you, Tem. Not if you're going after him. Sasuke glowered, snarling, I need to see how much I've advanced. We've sparred, you've gotten better at least, you have those clones, we can take him. We don't even know who this guy is, he could be some Anbu-type ninja, which we are totally not up for. Naruto refuted, unable to believe that this was coming out of his mouth, but knowing he had to convince Sasuke this was a stupid idea. No one could go off by themselves. They had no idea where this guy was now because it was doubtful that he'd stayed where he'd killed Naruto's clone, and they had enough threats on their lives without seeking out a new one when they totally weren't ready. Fine then, I'll find him myself. You coward. Sasuke spat, turning on his heel and sprinting off, Sakura crying, Sasuke-kun. Wait, but not running after him. Naruto swore, and nodded to his clone, who took off after him. That one would at least try and persuade him, and if that didn't work, try knocking him out. He needed to stay with Sakura and get her settled and hidden, then maybe he could risk going after that arrogant. Come on Sakura. Let's get to the hide, Naruto said shortly, reaching for her arm, but Sakura spun around and glared at him. No. She said passionately, we're going after Sasuke-kun. Why? Naruto glared back, frustration at his crush's inexplicable affection for and who would barely give her the time of day finally boiling over. Why are you so loyal to him? He thinks you're an annoying, useless, weakling who's holding him back. He thinks everyone is an annoying weakling who's holding him back. I teach him about traps, about stealth, hunt for food, and he calls me Dobby, he calls me weak and useless. What do you think he thinks about you, Sakura-chan? Huh, we go after him, and we get killed. Naruto frowned, crossing his arms and glaring at his feet. I don't want you dying here. Well, it's my life, and we're supposed to be a team. Sakura glared back at him, bright red. We are a team, so we're going after him. Even if he doesn't think we're a team, we are. So let's go. Naruto wavered, before slumping and agreeing quietly. What did it, honestly? She said. He was part of the team too. Personally, he doubted she'd be so ardent about going after him if he'd been the one to run off, but with that, floating out there, he could at least pretend. Following after her, if she set the pace, it'd take longer to get there, which was all to the good in his opinion. He glanced up at the trees worriedly and anxiously awaited a bursting clone. Hopefully Sensei really was watching all this time, they could really use the help. Kakashi was flying across the roofs, nearly at the Forest of Death. He'd left 2 clones in the forest in case one dispelled on accident, and one had dispelled itself after the 3 idiots decided to go after an unknown strength foreign nin who'd already killed one of their own. He'd been told Sasuke was sensible, was a prodigy, but this was absolute stupidity. Naruto had been the voice of reason, of all people, and had only agreed to go after him when Sakura had made a somewhat impassioned speech about teamwork. He was glad they had at least gotten that piece down, though if they'd have done the same had Naruto run off remained to be seen, but Sasuke was going to have this arrogance beat out of him if it was the only and last thing he learned. Leaving them to their own devices seemed to have gotten as far as it could. When this was over, if they survived and Sasuke had some sense beat into him, he'd be getting them out of the forest and having them report for the training regimen of their worst nightmares the following morning, those little brats. He finally hit the Forest of Death, heading straight for where his clone had a tracking seal in its pocket, hoping that the kids were still far away from the escapee, when memories hit. He expertly sorted through them and swore aloud, sending another burst of chakra into his legs and accelerating to nigh unbelievable speeds. They'd actually managed to find the Sasuke had gotten there first, the Naruto clone following him, staying out of the way until the idiot genin was almost skewered, where the more sensible clone jumped in to try and interfere or at least buy some time. The clone was dispelled rather quickly, but before clone Kakashi could jump down and deal with it, Sakura and Naruto the real one burst into the clearing, and Sakura didn't even think, flying for Sasuke with a cry, while Naruto at least focused on the important part of the entire thing. The dead last was the one he had to work with the least. How was that even possible? Sasuke shoved Sakura off with glares and grumbles, launching into the fray with Naruto, the pair exhibiting good instinctive double teaming but not up to a Junin level opponent even after the loving care of T&I. Didn't help that Sakura was just standing there, sure, a kunai in hand, but she looked about as useful as a helpless damsel in some television drama. It'd be a great way to lure people in, if it weren't actually the truth. At this point Kakashi clone intervened, deflecting a shuriken heading for a hopelessly slow, and out of breath, seriously. Sakura before involving himself in the fight. He'd at least managed to fend the man off and give him pause when Sasuke was tossed his way, and he could either dodge, and let him break a leg with how the kid was failing to correct his fall, or get dispelled. The clone dispelled, and Naruto was now fighting alone. Shit. Kakashi, unlike his idiot students, knew the value of intelligence, so paused, dropped down from his tree and suppressed his chakra. He had trained with Guy in chakra-suppressed subterfuge and shinobi arts after the man had managed to actually sneak up on him some years ago, so he would be fine and the advantage would be worth the inconvenience. He quickly reached the forcibly cleared area and paused, light genjutsu keeping them from noticing him, and said the situation meaningfully in moments. It was shit. Sakura was being held by the escapee, the man's shaking hands holding a kunai to her throat, a deep gash on her face and tears leaking out of her eyes. Sasuke and Naruto were both standing there, both deeply shaken, and Naruto, at least, visibly furious. "Throw down your weapons, little genin," the man taunted, Kakashi recognizing him as an Iwa infiltrator brought in 3 weeks ago from Otafaku Guy. Lovely. This was just getting better. Both boys hesitated, but reluctantly obeyed, and Kakashi at least felt somewhat proud of them. They were still utterly screwed once he got them out of this. He quickly drifted around so he was in the Iwa Nin's blind spot, finding one of Naruto's clones lurking in a bush while he was there. Tapping the clone by the shoulder, he nodded shortly at the clone's relieved look and handed a treasured old, never-used kunai to him. With quick, overly obvious hand signs, efficient sign language, now on the list, he indicated the clone was to throw it into the ground at the enemy nin's feet to distract him on Kakashi's signal. The clone nodded and crept around a bit so he was still in sight but had an angle for that kind of shot. Kakashi flexed his hands thoughtfully, listening to taunts and shaken demands before nodding sharply and shooting forward, kunai landing in front of the Iwa nin, who had just enough time to shout in alarm when, crack, he was dead, neck snapped, and Sakura shoving the arm away and stepping away, shuddering as she stared between Kakashi and the dead shinobi in shock. Naruto got a distant look on his face before stepping forward and picking up the decoy kunai, Kakashi unable to entirely ignore the pang at seeing him blankly pick up a sealed kunai he should have recognized, he should have known. "Here Kakashi-sensei," Naruto said, cleaning the kunai and handing it back, Kakashi accepting it with a nod and looking the three over. Sakura was shaking in shock, cut across her left eye still bleeding, but her gaze tracked his motion so at least her eye itself wasn't damaged, skittering off her skull he would guess. Sasuke was pale but sullen, fists clenched at his side and standing at a rough approximation of attention, bruises blossoming and scrapes oozing drops of blood. Naruto had some bruising and scrapes but they were already fading, Kakashi watching with some jealousy. Bloody Uzumaki constitution was good enough as it was, Add in the fox's regenerative capabilities and it just wasn't fair. The three of you are quite possibly the luckiest morons I have ever had the displeasure of working with, Kakashi said lowly, dangerously. Naruto looked mulish, probably resenting it when he'd actually tried to be sensible. He'd have to correct that, but the genin didn't say anything. The boy was a fast learner outside the classroom, it seemed. Sasuke, his little genius, actually tried to argue. He actually tried to object. That arrogant little shit, who the hell had been fluffing his ego so damn much? Oh, that's right, everyone. This was going to be a fun lesson to teach. Not even listening, he blurred forward and grabbed him by the back of his shirt, lifting him off his feet and shaking him. A punch would have been nice, but he didn't know how badly he'd actually been injured, and worsening cracked ribs would not put him into anyone's good books. The genin shut up, shocked, and Kakashi tossed him away, Sasuke rolling and scrambling back to his feet, Kakashi flaring his killing intent to keep him quiet. Shut up, he whispered, voice still carrying clearly in the clearing, you are a disgrace. Your teammate tells you a threat of unknown strength, clearly more than capable of taking out one of your teammates, even in less than solid form, and you decided to test yourself. Oh yes, he nodded at Sasuke's startled look, barely there but too obvious for him. I heard all of that. Wanted to test your capacity, hum. Sasuke blanched, swaying at the somewhat cruel reference, but Kakashi couldn't bring himself to care. This little shit had nearly gotten his teammates killed because he was an idiot. He deserved every bit of it right now, and needed to realize just what the hell he had almost done. Naruto, escort your teammate to your camp and wait there for me to collect you, Kakashi ordered the orange-wearing genin, who nodded with a hesitant glance at Sakura, who was still shaking. Kakashi stepped over to her and scooped her up into his arms, the pink-haired girl curling into his chest and shuddering, tears running down her face still. He almost sighed. Comforting was not a particular talent of his, but she seemed willing to take what little he could manage. I will be taking Sakura-chan to the hospital. Once she is settled I will come back for you. Naruto nodded at that, clearly relieved, and Kakashi took off, trusting them to at least not be complete morons. He'd have to report the Iwa Nin's death when he got there too, but that shouldn't take more than a few moments. If he was feeling particularly generous, he wouldn't mention Sasuke's moronic move in the written report and make the entire thing sound like an accident. The Sandaime would hear the truth, of course. He'd probably be rather pleased with Naruto's progress. Sakura was furious. Sensei had rescued her, and the boys had tried, but she'd been utterly useless. By the time the medics got to her, she'd managed to stop crying, and Sensei even stayed with her, sending a clone off to report the death of that foreign nin and then collect the boys. The sympathetic nurse helped clean her face of all the blood, and a medic nin came by and said quietly that he'd be able to heal it, but there would be a scar. It was just too ragged of a cut. She only nodded, still internally fuming. Inner Sakura was ranting and raving and screaming about how useless she'd been, about how helpless she'd been. What good was being the top kunoichi if all she could do was stand there and shake and cry and look pretty? What good was working for Sasuke-kun if she probably wouldn't even live through being on a team with him? Sensei, she asked finally, looking up after the medic nin had left to fetch some cream that would at least help with the scar before letting her go. The silver-haired man looked up from where he was sitting in one of the uncomfortable hospital chairs, reading his orange book, and tilted his head to the side in mute question. Do you think I could use a genjutsu? She asked, waving a hand at her face and biting her lip at his raised eyebrow, elaborating, my parents, I don't want them to be upset. And we were just training. If I can just keep it up until we have a mission, then, I mean, they won't be too angry. While I do think you have the chakra control necessary for a genjutsu, You don't have the reserves for such a long-term one. It's going to be a long time before you three go on a mission where you could conceivably get a scar. She still stared at him stubbornly, before lowering her gaze to her hands. Her sensei sighed and said, I can teach it to you, on the understanding that if your parents find out, you are responsible for this and I advised against it. In fact, I will disown teaching you the genjutsu and say I thought you had informed them of the incident and even told them to feel free to contact me. Understood. Sakura nodded, looking up at him hopefully and eagerly listening to his basic explanation of genjutsu in general and the one she would be applying, a less extensive and longer-lasting henge, in particular. She could tell that if she went through with this and it didn't work, and her parents did find out, she'd be in even bigger trouble, but she had to try. She had to. Besides, if she did this, and made it last, that would make her chakra reserves bigger, right? It would be good practice, and she needed to get better. Kakashi watched his female genin out of the corner of his eye as they made their way to Naruto's apartment. His clone had reported the death and given a basic outline of what had happened, but had requested the evening to go over things with his genin and been granted it. Fetching Naruto and Sasuke, who had been sullenly glaring at each other in their campsite, he called team meeting and Naruto offered his place with only mild urging. Kakashi didn't want any of these brats knowing where he lived just yet, that was for certain. Sakura was a bit of a surprise. Apparently what he'd mistaken for shock and terror was that, yes, but also with a more than usual dose of self-directed rage. Her initiative with the genjutsu was a pleasant surprise. It was currently on and making it appear she hadn't been injured at all, though she still looked tired and dirty. That was the difference between this one and henge. It didn't change her whole appearance, just taking a fragment to illusion and letting the otherwise natural looks seep through. It wasn't used too often, but Kakashi was probably the one who used it most. Making his eyes match and changing his hair color was much less chakra intensive and a ridiculously effective disguise. It'd be interesting if she actually managed to ration her genjutsu use appropriately to keep it from her parents. He probably wasn't supposed to encourage deception from parents, but he was a shinobi, lies were what he did, and besides that, he agreed with her. Their pretty little daughter coming home scarred for life from training was not exactly something they would be happy about. Not that they could do anything, until she served for 6 years she was stuck. It was in the contract of the academy, and she'd both graduated and passed his test, so there was no way out for her. On one level, he felt a little bad for those who got into this sort of position and were truly unsuited for shinobi life. On another, he didn't really care all that much because they had signed on for it, and 6-year-olds were perfectly capable of making life-changing decisions. He'd done that and more at the same age, after all. They had to take responsibility for their agreements. They reached Naruto's apartment and he sighed. He'd worked with Naruto as a guard before, but seeing the boy live in this apartment complex by himself, when he clearly wasn't ready for it, as even he would now admit he hadn't been at the age Naruto started, had been painful. Was painful, really, especially with how much potential he was finding the boy had if someone had just taught him. All of them had potential, but Naruto's was just easier for him to see and plan around. And honestly appeared to need less work to draw out, bit of attention, some basic guidance, and a looming threat, done. The other two, well, it would depend on how long this initiative of Sakura's last. Sakura. Naruto clearly looked relieved as he opened the door for them, Sasuke sitting at the table with a half-eaten bowl of instant ramen in front of him, Naruto's chair indicated by the impressive stack of empty ramen cups. Do you want any ramen? Tea? Both, please, Sakura replied immediately, apparently deciding that the idea of real food. Kakashi scoffed mentally. Ramen was decent enough, but much less nutritious than what they'd been eating in the forest, was worth being polite for. Sensei? Naruto asked, Kakashi shutting the door behind them and adding a security jutsu almost absent-mindedly. Tea, please, Naruto-kun, he replied, taking a seat across from Sasuke, who refused to meet his eyes and instead glared at his ramen cup. Kakashi let the silence rest, until Naruto came back with their ramen and tea, taking his own seat with yet another cup of ramen. It wasn't until Sakura had started eating that Kakashi finally spoke, saying flatly, "Explain." Sasuke's shoulders tensed. He would say hunched, but the Uchiha remembered enough of his clan's stoicism to refrain from being that clearly defensive, and he replied stiffly, "I was trying to improve our teamwork and get us out of the forest faster." That made sense, Kakashi realized, face and body language giving nothing of his surprise away. Mentally reviewing what he had observed personally and witnessed through his clones, that fit rather well with the sment he had of Sasuke at this stage. He was still confident enough in his position as top dog within the genin hierarchy of their team to not feel threatened to the point of affirming his authority with a stupid stunt. It was one of the reasons Kakashi had been so angry at Sasuke's decision. He hadn't expected anything like this until one of the others showed significant progress and risked challenging Sasuke's position. How was that going to improve our teamwork? Naruto demanded. Sakura scolding him for language she was ignored. Kakashi-sensei did the same thing. Sasuke snapped back, setting us against a superior opponent and forcing us to rely on one another to defeat them. It was the only time we actually worked together. Even this whole time in the forest we only worked together when he forced us to with threats. I thought if we proved we could work together to take down an opponent we would prove we'd learned our lesson and get out of the forest faster. He clearly hesitated before continuing reluctantly. I also assumed that Kakashi-sensei had actually sent the foreign nin into our sphere of influence as a test and I didn't want to fail. He actually would do something like that too, if not with an actual escaped prisoner, Kakashi reluctantly admitted, almost ruefully amused, since the consequences of this misunderstanding had been so relatively mild. He had a hell of a lot to learn about being a sensei it seemed, because while they had managed to work together, and in such a way he could easily list the prisoner death as a genuine team effort and provide some proof positive that he wasn't obeying the council, this level of miscommunication was not something that could continue. And you couldn't have said something? Sakura demanded, Naruto agreeing and adding, Kakashi-sensei was observing the whole time, probably. If you'd said something he could have stopped us and said it wasn't some weird stupid test. Before the argument could erupt and make this situation worse, Kakashi interrupted and said calmly, "It appears, then, that I owe you all an apology." All three genin silenced at that and turned to look at him, Naruto at least going gratifyingly bug-eyed at his now empty teacup. Naruto, he started, looking over at him, first, I wanted to acknowledge that you had the right idea, taking your teammates and going to ground and waiting for orders. It is not a move I expected you to make at this point in time, so it is a very good sign. Well done. Naruto blinked at him for a few moments before giving a small, brilliant smile at the acknowledgement that Kakashi took heart in even while cursing the laws that kept his tongue tied with his sensei's son. Turning next to Sasuke, he continued, to you, Sasuke, I must first apologize for not hearing you out immediately after the incident was concluded. I can only offer that I was stressed, angry, and worried for your and your teammates' safety and health. The Uchiha heir paused briefly before acknowledging the apology with a short nod. Kakashi made a mental note to keep an eye on him because this would be a potential source of bitterness. Damn and blast, the Sandaime was going to be pissed. Finally he turned to Sakura and said, for you Sakura, I can only offer a blanket apology that my clones did not interfere immediately when you all took off for the shinobi. It was deemed unlikely all three of you would stop without the clone dispelling, leaving you with no backup whatsoever until I got there with no means of easily finding you. He made a mental note to give them tracking seals, he should have thought of that sooner. Turning so he could capture all three of them in his limited field of vision, he said, "Now, so that this will not happen again. I will never unexpectedly set you against a foreign ninja within Konoha. If you are encountered by a foreign nin with hostile intent in Konoha itself, immediately assume they are truly hostile and determine the appropriate course of action from there, the end goal at this stage in your training being your own survival." There, that should clear the air somewhat. Now for the next piece, which was difficult for him to admit to them but they needed to hear. Also, you three need to realize that I did not pass any genin team before you, not only because they were not acting as a team, but because I did not want to be a sensei, he said bluntly. I did not, and do not, think that I would be the best sensei. I am considered something of a genius myself. I am not particularly good at explaining things which I find nearly instinctive. I was assigned students repeatedly in the hopes that I would pass on my talents and abilities, which I would not mind doing, but not to genin. Few of my techniques and tactics are appropriate for genin level shinobi and none are appropriate for students straight out of the academy. Of the teams which I failed, 3 have passed other sensei's exam and are doing rather well. He wanted to grit his teeth around this last secret, this last fact, but knew that if it came to light in some other way, the potential bitterness in Sasuke would explode forward and he'd never get the boy back. The genin, at least, did not interrupt and waited the few moments it took him to come to terms with so blatantly stating his shortcomings as a sensei. The last person I taught in any formal manner was Uchiha Itachi, he finally said, watching Sasuke carefully as he said this and unsurprised when the boy went completely rigid, staring at him with wide, almost hurt eyes. It has, somewhat ruined me, for teaching anyone, after what he did with my teachings. Naruto said into the silence that had fallen, not to be, stupid, or anything, but, who's Uchiha Itachi? Besides a relative of Sasuke, I mean. That's kind of obvious. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at Sasuke, indicating that it was up to him to answer. He didn't think the boy would react well to Kakashi handing out secrets he'd held close to his chest, and he needed to get the Uchiha to at least somewhat trust him again after he'd apparently completely botched this entire affair. Maybe he could get a clone to report to the Sandaime. He is my brother, Sasuke admitted reluctantly, and he killed my family. He the guy you want to kill? Naruto said immediately, Sasuke nodding shortly, entire body tense. Well, we'll help if we can, Naruto promised, turning to Sakura and asking, right Sakura-chan? Right, Sakura said, voice surprisingly firm as she spoke directly to her crush, before turning to look up at Kakashi and saying, and we'll tell you if we don't get something, sensei. And we can help explain things to each other. I helped these guys with the tree climbing exercise, and Sasuke was really good at explaining taijutsu to Naruto, and Naruto taught us traps. We can teach each other too. And you're not a bad sensei, you taught me that genjutsu really fast. Genjutsu. Both boys perked up, eyeing Sakura curiously. What genjutsu? Naruto asked. Sakura hesitated before nodding determinedly and dropping the jutsu, both boys blanching at the blatant scar crossing her face. Sakura-chan! Naruto cried, truly distressed, but apparently unable to think of anything to say. Sorry, Sasuke mumbled, Kakashi counting that as a definite win. Even if Sasuke hadn't been the moron he'd thought initially, he at least acknowledged that his plan had consequences and not the type he'd wanted, and was willing to accept responsibility for them. It's okay, Sasuke-kun, Naruto, Sakura raised her chin, continuing, the genjutsu's just until we get a mission out of the village. I didn't want my parents to know I'd gotten permanently scarred while in training. Right, Kakashi finally said, dragging the conversation back on track, so. I will report this encounter as a successful team mission for Team 7. That should give us some breathing room with the council, but the threat is by no means over. You will report to Training Ground 7 tomorrow at 6. When I arrive later, I expect you to have warmed up, worked on what you learned in the forest, and worked out at least one team attack strategy for the Iowa Shinobi. He waited for them to nod before continuing, then, we will do team training until lunch. During lunch, expect a theory lecture of some sort. You will be expected to intelligently discuss the topic after we conclude the afternoon's D-rank missions, which are little more than glorified chores. In the ones which allow for conversation, you can discuss and debate those topics depending on appropriateness in preparation for the concluding discussion. Any questions? They all exchanged looks, before Sasuke spoke up. Not right now, sensei. Can we ask tomorrow? You can always ask me questions, on anything. However, you will need to accept that some answers will be along the lines of, classified, and even, I don't want to tell you. Understood. Yes, sensei, they chorused. Kakashi was satisfied. With any luck, this policy of frank discussion of reality would keep the team grounded and united, and prevent misunderstandings of the sort that had started this whole mess. Good. Sakura, Sasuke, I or my clone will escort you home, he informed them, nodding to Naruto. Naruto, have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow morning. See you then, sensei, Sakura-chan, Sasuke-tem, Naruto replied, light tone on the insult echoed in Sasuke's smirking nod and returned, Dobi. Kakashi was tempted to roll his eye, but refrained and simply created a shadow clone, that clone accompanying Sakura, recently applied genjutsu and all, to her parents' home, while he decided to escort Sasuke personally. He needed to give the boy a chance to respond to what had happened without his teammates as witnesses, and even though shadow clones really were perfect reflections, people still had a tendency to prefer to talk to the real person. They had made it back to the Uchiha compound itself when Sasuke finally spoke. Sensei, did you really train Itachi? He was my subordinate in Anbu, Kakashi replied, knowing that Sasuke had known of Itachi's position within the elite unit and that his own presence in the group was something of an open secret within the shinobi forces of Konoha. He was then promoted at my recommendation and my colleague. We frequently worked together. He decided to keep firmly behind his teeth any and all of his suspicions and doubts regarding the massacre. He had been on a long-term undercover mission for a few months leading up to and after the massacre, so he couldn't say if something had changed and caused the relatively balanced and endlessly loyal Itachi to snap, but something in his gut told him that there was more to it. But not enough to bring anything up to the understandably traumatized and deeply involved Sasuke. Do you think I will ever be able to kill him? Sasuke finally asked, very obviously having to force himself to admit to any doubts as to his ability to accomplish his goal. Kakashi crouched down next to him, the pair of them now standing in front of the house Sasuke used as his primary residence in the depressing place, before saying firmly, yes. It will take time. Time and a lot of work. Itachi is brilliant and he will not have stopped strengthening himself in the years before you meet again. You will have to catch up to him at a truly ridiculous rate if you want to beat him alone. But if you accept the help that Naruto and Sakura offered you, if you accept the help I offer you, as someone who failed to see the signs and was also betrayed by him, then the time can be cut down and the odds in your favor be improved. Sasuke's jaw tightened and he looked away, Kakashi resting a hand on the boy's shoulder and saying, think about it. He rose to his full height and started to walk away before remembering something he had forgotten to apologize for, and truly regretted now. Sasuke, he said, turning and catching the boy just before he opened his door. The genin, clearly shocked at the deep bow Kakashi offered him. I apologize for throwing that man's words in your face. I misread the situation and hurt you for it. Thank you, sensei, Sasuke whispered, returning the bow shortly and finally retreating to his home. Kakashi straightened and briefly debated leaving a clone or summon behind to monitor the situation, before deciding that it would violate his students' privacy too much this early in the game, and leaving to his own home to finish outlining a training plan for the next few days. And to develop an injury-minimizing strategy for explaining his failure to the Sandaime. We're gonna die, Naruto groaned, collapsing onto the grass in their training grounds. Sakura braced herself on her knees, panting heavily as she nodded in agreement. Sasuke merely grunted, dropping to sit on the ground, sweat dripping down his face. Don't be ridiculous, Kakashi chided, internally cackling at the way the three twitched away from him, Naruto whimpering something about mercy and Ramen's salvation. He wasn't going to ask. I'd never kill you. There's no profit in that. Now, get up and start stretching. You may leave here sore, but if you leave here stiff, I'll make you do twice as much tomorrow. If he wasn't mistaken, even Sasuke whimpered at that one, before Sakura helped the boys upright and they started their cool-down routine. A well-oiled and practiced one by now, 1 week after the Forest of Death fiasco. He'd shown up at 9 o'clock the day after their team meeting, as promised, to find they had followed his orders admirably and Sakura had gone above and beyond the ongoing team-building requirement by bringing extra bentos for the boys, who were obviously ill-practiced at proper nutrition. Sasuke at least tried, but his diet still left something to be desired. The less said about Naruto's, the better. Their strategies for the Iwa Nin were interesting. They had a plausible one worked out by the time he got there, a few outlandish ones that presupposed a lot of things, but, and here was the important part, none that worked without all three of them participating at their current skill level. No random power-ups or overestimated skills here, they were each brutally honest about their own and each other's skill set. That sort of honesty was worth its weight in gold for any shinobi. For them to have developed it this early was fantastic. Well worth the conversation he'd had with the Sandaime that morning. Brutal honesty had saved him there too, after all. With that honest cement in hand, he was able to design individualized training incorporated into the team-building exercises he had planned and they didn't argue about it. Oh sure, they complained, everyone did at these things, but they did it. Once he explained what each exercise was designed to overcome or compensate for, they had no objections at all and even asked for ways to make each exercise more challenging once they'd progressed far enough. He was glad he had given that Iwa Nin a quick death. By now, it was obvious he'd earned it. All right, lunch, he called, the three completing their current exercise before coming back and gratefully taking the calorie-packed lunches he'd brought them. That had quickly become a routine once he'd noticed the lunches Sasuke and Naruto brought the second day. Sakura was doing better, but still had a tendency to undereat, and after the first day he'd brought them, they even agreed to set aside 1D rank per day to fund his food-buying purchases. So courteous. Questions? He asked after Flash eating half of his lunch. It had only taken 4 days for them to stop with the attempts to see under his mask while they ate, courtesy some pointed comments about privacy between comrades, but there was no reason to be complacent. How many more of these D ranks do we have to do, sensei? Sasuke asked, Naruto and Sakura perking up. Until what? Kakashi asked, enjoying their frustrated exchange of glances. He knew what they were after, they still hadn't found his clone observer under Genjutsu every morning, but wanted them to spell it out. Looking omnipotent was all well and good, but not if they ever managed to actually hide something from him only to assume he already knew about it. Until we can do AC rank. Sakura burst. She was much less passive now, and was more free with her blows to the head, the face Sasuke had made when she brained him on day 3. Priceless even though she'd pulled back with Naruto, another pointed comment, they were marvelous at picking up hints, as well as her opinions. Ino Buddha-chan is. First. Kakashi interrupted, holding up a finger, nickname. Reasoning. Now. She blushed, cutting a glance to Sasuke before she straightened her shoulders and reported, we were best friends, until we decided that we would be romantic rivals for Sasuke's attention and then the nicknames started. She calls me Forehead, I call her Ino Pig. Kakashi raised his one visible eyebrow and stared, before turning to Sasuke, newly sullen, and asking mildly, Sasuke. Your opinion? Stupid. Sasuke replied shortly, we're 12. I'm not going to be looking for a romantic partner for years. So instead you throw away a solid friendship for a stupid crush. And then ruin your chances as a shinobi for it. Yeah, what was with the hair thing? Naruto wrinkled his nose, where did you guys get the idea that Sasuke-tem liked long hair? I mean, maybe he does, but that seems weird. They stalked me, and spread rumors, and stalked me more, Sasuke replied flatly, before sounding almost insulted as he continued, and they weren't even very good at it. Sakura? Kakashi asked, stopping the boys with another gesture. She was horribly red, scars standing out starkly white against her skin, but she managed to say, I know. And I don't. It's not my focus anymore. I'll stop with the nickname sensei. Ma, no need for that, if it's truly a nickname. Kakashi waved it off, relaxing his posture slightly and watching as all the genin echoed it. Unconscious echoing, now, but a good sign for the future. Affection-born nicknames can bring greater unity and a sense of comradeship, but insulting names, when not underscored by amiability as in the case of these two, alienate people. One person, to one team, to one village, they all chorused, Sasuke and Sakura rolling their eyes, while Naruto looked dead serious, as he had since the first time Kakashi had uttered that mantra. Ah well, they'd get it eventually. They'd better. I guess, I don't know, if it's amiable, Sakura said thoughtfully, before shrugging, so I'll stop and talk to Ino about it. Anyway. Ino was bragging the other day that her sensei was going to get them AC rank because they were just doing so brilliantly and it was such a shame that Sasuke-kun had me and Naruto baka, her words, to drag him down. Naruto shrugged at the relayed insult, Sasuke grunting again, neither surprised. She'd told them all about it this morning after all, and Naruto, surprise, had made the connection for their next point. So we were thinking, Kakashi-sensei, that we need to do one soon too. I remember Shika complaining about how he'd end up with Ino and Choji, didn't mind Choji, but Ino he wasn't looking forward to, because everyone thought they were clones of their dads and their teamwork was supposed to be awesome. Naruto picked up the verbal baton, far calmer and more articulate with daily doses of positive reinforcement from Kakashi and non-hostile, even friendly, banter with his teammates. Ah, the sweet sound of success. And we're supposed to be better, Sasuke said shortly. It was adorable the way they designed their arguments so he had to say the least amount possible. Sound logic, Kakashi said after a few moments' silence to let them sweat. Now for my response. He leaned forward slightly and they again echoed him, becoming intently focused on his words. You are not ready. What? But sensei, we have to do one. But we're doing one anyway, Sasuke said over the other two's exclamations, dark eyes watching Kakashi carefully. We have to prove we have the best teamwork. Exactly, Kakashi straightened, wanting each of them to listen to this part. You are not ready. I've spoken with the other sensei and their students aren't ready either, but there's a certain cachet in being the first to take a team out on AC rank, and they want it. The three new teams this year have equally new sensei, and they're all out to prove something to each other. Are you? Sakura asked. Before answering herself, no, sorry. You have a different audience, right? The council. Kakashi nodded, pleased she'd figured that out herself, precisely. So we have to do better than them, especially better than the team already rumored to have magnificent teamwork by genetics. Recommendations for preparation. 1 each. 1 minute. Go. They all fell silent, finishing their food while they thought over the problem, Kakashi wolfing down the last bit of his own and reading a few paragraphs before their time was up. Naruto, you're up, he said, looking over the rim of his book at the boy. The blonde, wearing a dark blue shirt with his orange pants, those would have to go before the mission, straightened to an approximation of sitting attention and said, there are standard C rank types, I think, protection for people, messenger duty, things like that. Could we request a specific type and then develop scenarios to work through, maybe? Just so we get some ideas as to what we can do in response to specific situations. Sasuke, your turn. Shadow clones, Sasuke said bluntly. Naruto can spam them, but that means he's the only one who gets alerted when one dispels. If Sakura and I could even make one, that'd be useful. And Sakura, one new skill each, she said promptly. I've been looking at field medicine. Naruto has tons of chakra, maybe he could learn a power move or something more draining that's useful. Sasuke is the fastest of us with taijutsu right now, so maybe he could add some weapons into that. Kakashi let the three of them have a moment to digest one another's responses before he said, good ideas, some problems. First, no, we can't request a specific type, Naruto. Second, neither you nor Sakura have the chakra capacity for one shadow clone yet. If you keep training like we have been, it should increase enough for one in a month. In your case, Sasuke, while Sakura, I'm honestly not sure, your rate of growth on your chakra capacity has been fluctuating too much for me to judge accurately. Finally, Iryo Jutsu require finer chakra control than you have now, Sakura. If you are interested, I can get you some extra control exercises and a basic jutsu scroll. For the other two suggestions in yours, good ideas but again, difficult to implement in a few days. I would be interested, Sakura replied, and he nodded, making a mental note to deal with that while they were doing D ranks. So here is what we are going to do, Kakashi said. I am going to outline a scenario for each of you to think about during today's D ranks. We'll discuss and dissect those tonight, then new scenarios for tomorrow's lunch. Feel free to exchange ideas tomorrow morning. Inside your scenario, combine two of your already learned skills to have greater impact on the enemy. We've done plenty of team combat drills, I know you can think of some new ones. I will select plausible ones and we'll work on implementation during training tomorrow. Critiques to follow. Repeat that the next day. Depart for AC rank in 2 days' time. Tomorrow I'll bring some old C rank reports from a variety of missions so you have some background reading. We can help with that, Naruto, Sakura said promptly. It had taken a couple of days for the other two genin to realize he struggled with reading kanji. Kakashi had very carefully failed at being entirely discreet when he offered to help the blonde learn, and, to Naruto's surprise and Kakashi's smug satisfaction, had immediately offered to help after a few moments of blank shock. In those moments he could almost see conclusions being drawn by the other two genin, taking into account Naruto's lack of family to teach him, the stares and whispers they'd already been subjected to as a team during the D ranks and whatever they had witnessed in their academy years. They were probably mostly wrong, but gave Naruto and himself some breathing room. He was working on the Sandaime as far as that went, he really was. Between his reports on their burgeoning teamwork and respectful reminders of his ongoing request to speak to Naruto about his heritage, at least his mother for Kami's sake, he was certain he'd give in with regards to one of those revelations eventually. Excellent. Sakura. Protection detail of one reasonably fit civilian-level individual, here too, T. Expected opposition, bandits intending to ransom. Sasuke. Messenger duty, commercially classified information on production methods encoded, here to Otafaku Guy. Expected opposition, hired hands from rival companies. Naruto. Merchant caravan protection, joint between Konoha and Grass, one team each, here to Kusa and back. Expected opposition, bandit groups after goods and money. Now let's go get today's missions. The three were so busy mulling over their assignments they didn't say a word as they tossed their food containers and fell into a lovely little team formation in front of him. Sakura. Genjutsu reapplied almost absently, she was getting good at that one, was on point, flanked by the two boys. She was the distraction, they were the pincers, from the Iowa plan. Teamwork, nearly unconscious now, and good PR. The civilians who watched cooed over how the boys were taking care of the helpless little girl and protecting her under the watchful eye of their devilishly handsome sensei, while the shinobi either took it at face value or read into it and freaked out that Sakura was the powerhouse of the team and all their previously accepted intelligence on them was wrong. He pulled out his book and hid his mask, the grin was too gleeful to suppress. Asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk 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 page break asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk asterisk asterisk. An insult to one. As an insult to all, the genin chorused the morning they were to request AC rank, concluding their little mantra recitation practice during their cool down. Meanwhile, Kakashi was patting himself on the back for including those C rank reports. He'd been careful to pick ones from teams with exemplary teamwork, like the later legendary Sanin, the original Ino Shikacho, even some lesser known, but just as good at working together, teams. For Naruto, he'd included one about his precious Iruka sensei and one about his though unknown father. His mother would have been a little too obvious with the last name, at least until he got permission from the Sandaime. Team leader? He asked, flicking his fingers in command and watching with satisfaction as they immediately formed up. Sasuke in village, Sakura out of village shinobi, Naruto out of village civilians, they even sighed in unison, so cute. Naruto's outspoken and unsubtle personality had been decided to be the least jarring to civilians, and the most annoying to other shinobi. Sakura, though still obviously not the best kunoichi to anyone with trained eyes, was capable of performing professionally in a way that still escaped Naruto when under stress. Sasuke hated dealing with people, but was willing to admit that in Konoha at least, his name opened a lot of doors with the civilian group and a fair number of shinobi too. It was given that he himself had overall command, particularly in combat situations. Thanks to an ongoing effort to teach basic hand signals, they might actually be able to communicate somewhat sensibly in that situation. He wasn't too hopeful though. This would be first blood for all of them, well, except for animals, but while that was shocking for most the first time, it wasn't as bone-deep traumatic as your first human, and once something like that happened, even just the adrenaline from their first serious fight, things like recently learned hand signals flew out the window. With any luck, their reflexes and his skill would get them out of this alive and some semblance of whole. They were growing on him after all. Like that demon mold in his fridge. Good. Well then, we're as ready as we're going to get by now, so let's go see the Hokage about that C rank. Kakashi pulled out his book and ambled along behind them, the three preteens near vibrating with energy as they walked. Sasuke was at least subtle. Clearly they were excited about this C rank, more excited than nervous, he figured. Blunt cement of their lack of readiness aside, they were children, and this was an adventure. When had missions last been an adventure for him, he wondered. Certainly well before he was their age, actually. Given his father's impressive career and equally impressive crash, it had been by the time he was 5. Well, there was yet another reason he always had thought he was doomed as a sensei. Adapting to the shinobi mentality wasn't something he had much experience in, not at the conscious level. And with these three, mostly Sakura, even now, he would have a lot to deal with after their first kills. Okami, Sasuke and kills, either relatively easy or complete psychotic break one way or the other. Damn it, maybe they could postpone the C rank. Curse you Itachi. Unfortunately, there was no way around this one, especially since he'd reported to the Sandaime last night on how today would need to play out. At least he had the Hokage's backing on this, otherwise this would get much more complicated. Team 7, requesting AC rank, Kakashi said blandly after they were brought to the Hokage's office, watching out of the corner of his eye as Iruka's head jerked up to stare at them, eyes narrow. The Chunin would know they weren't ready, and cared enough about Naruto to object if he felt strongly enough about it. Ya Hokage Jiak, Sakura. Naruto rubbed the back of his head and sighed theatrically, restarting, Ya Hokage-sama, 1C rank please. Happy Sakura. Ecstatic, she replied loftily, Sasuke rolling his eyes on the left. Had he made them practice this yesterday evening? Yes. Yes he had. If they acted enough, it would come naturally. Junin Hatake, you are certain they're ready? Sarutobi asked, Kakashi looking up from his book and saying simply, yes. A confidently delivered lie, if he did say so himself. Very well. Let us see. Escort? No, he hasn't arrived yet. Caravan. Guy's team. Kakashi glared, not letting any of his panic-induced killing intent seep through, because he was a professional, but if the Sandaime assigned his barely averted disaster of a team to the same mission as Guy this early in the game. His lips were twitching around that pipe, the bastard. He was just screwing with him. He knew he'd gotten off too easily for the Forest of Death mess, he should have expected something like this. Shit. He hadn't even thought to brief the brats on current teams they might work with, there were only the 4 right now and they knew 2 of the others already. Crap. No, not yet, I think, the Hokage continued, setting that form aside and Kakashi almost, but didn't quite dare, sighed in relief. Iruka had no compunctions, and did, eyeing Naruto carefully at the same time before suppressing a shudder. Naruto. Meeting Guy. Okami-sama no. Not until he'd gotten his hooks into the kid and anchored him, he had enough quirks as it was, there was no need to expose him to others. Shoreline Patrol. The Hokage skimmed the scroll in his hands, expression placid but a minuscule shift of his eyelids indicated pleasure. This was the one they were going to be getting then. Wave stretch. And then, since you're going that way anyway, a message delivery to a merchant family at Keiharu Port. Whichever order you prefer, Kakashi-kun. Both scrolls were rolled up and passed to him, he accepted with a bow while Iruka recorded the assignment. He'd go over the mission scrolls in detail later, right now he had to go and get his little minions ready for their first serious mission, at least 2 weeks too soon. And here he had hoped that, not being in wartime, if he ever did pass a team, there would be no worry about them being thrown into missions they weren't ready for. In council. Naruto was now literally shaking with excitement, but managed to keep it under control until they got out of the tower before exploding with glee, yada. C rank. Finally. Sakura and Sasuke, though less loud, had a grin and smile on their faces, respectively, clearly equally happy at their new missions. Neither required an immediate departure, so he didn't feel any rush when he told them, pack for 3 weeks, meet at the southern gate in 2 hours. Check each other's gear. That should take care of over or underpacking, or at least make them think about what they were packing more. Anything else would just be an object lesson, and having to share so they relied on one another would be yet another lesson on teamwork and the importance thereof. Sakura was happy. The money she had earned from their ridiculous number of D ranks, 3 or 4 a day, was more than enough for her to change her outfit, and as soon as she could afford it, she had. Her first real C rank was as good a chance as any to pull it out. Muted blues and greens, with off-white wrappings for her arms and calves, and a blue scarf that wrapped around her hair while still looking fashionable. The retired kunoichi in the shop she'd gone to had been so helpful when it came to picking things out. She wanted to take her career seriously, but she still wanted to take pride in her appearance. She doubted either of her teammates would understand that. Sasuke, attractive as he could be, never changed his outfit, and she meant never. Naruto, his jacket well and truly dead thanks to their Forest of Death trip, thanked Kami. Still went out of his way to wear something neon and dreadful. Maybe they could kill the pants on this mission, surely Sensei would get behind that. Shinobi didn't wear neon, though he did read those neon orange books all the time. Well, however that worked out, she was all packed. 2 changes of clothes, more than that in underwear, some socks in case they ever had time to rest and it was cold, 2 pouches of kunai, 1 of shuriken and a basic medical kit with bandages, soldier pills and some poultices and herbs. Not too much of the latter, that added a lot of weight, so she packed a small pamphlet on medicinal herbs for that region that had been included in the massive packet Sensei had given her yesterday, and a scroll on chakra control exercises and 1 Iryo Jutsu got stuffed into the pack as well. She knew her Sensei. There was no way they wouldn't have training time on this trip, and maybe if she brought stuff that she could work on, she'd be allowed to work on that instead of whatever awful exercises he came up with. A girl could dream, right? Then she also packed some ration bars and dried spices. She should be able to bargain her cooking expertise with Naruto's traps. He was much better at hunting than she was, even if he did bring back some disgusting things he claimed were edible. She would never admit it, but the larva had actually been rather good. And, the most vital and valuable supply of all. 1 bar of chocolate. Asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk 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 page break asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk asterisk asterisk. Sasuke was having a mild existential crisis. He had broken a few kunai and shuriken over the course of their training with Sensei when the man taught him to enhance his speed and force with chakra in anticipation of his Sharingan activating, it would. And hadn't had a chance to shop for more. He had already gone through his father and mother's stock and didn't have time to hunt through the rest of the compound, and he needed more of them for this mission. He delayed as long as he could, packing everything into a lightweight pack designed for genin who couldn't yet seal supplies away and ensuring he could carry it easily, but now all that was left was his kunai and shuriken deficit. So he was standing in front of Itachi's room, a room he had avoided going in since the night of the massacre, and trying to think of another stash of ninja weapons that he could get to in the compound. Unfortunately, he wasn't entirely certain where anyone else in the family had kept their stash, and he'd never been able to bring himself to rummage through his family's echoingly empty homes to get supplies, even if he was using those supplies to train so he could avenge them. He was shakily reaching for the handle of the door when he heard a crash outside and an unmistakable and ridiculously loud voice bellowing, "Tem. You're going to make us late. Shut up, Naruto." Sakura barked, a thud and crack meaning she'd struck another blow. "We don't even know if he's here. Sasuke. Hurry up. Come on, let's blitz through and find him." Naruto cried. Sakura's shrieks of, "Don't you dare, that's so rude, Naruto," following the dobi as he crashed through the door with a cry of victory. Sasuke hearing two pairs of almost quiet feet padding up to him, and he immediately looked over to catch them both in a glare when they got to the hall. Yo, Tem, what's up? You're usually first to get anywhere. Naruto demanded, bright blue eyes concerned even as his face had a shit-eating grin on it. Sasuke desperately wanted to punch him. He knew it was Naruto's idea to go find him. He still had 20 minutes to get to the gate. So what if he was usually 30 minutes early? He was just taking his time today. There was no reason to be concerned for him. He was absolutely fine. Whoa, Tem, you alright? A hand rested on his shoulder, Naruto's expression now concerned as well. Sakura was hovering next to him, looking much more professional in her new muted blue and green outfit, green eyes equally worried. I'm low on kunai and shuriken, Sasuke said shortly. Sakura nodded, saying, yeah, you did break a lot trying to get that speed and strength enhancement under control this week. But there's not much time to buy any, not and test them for balance and stuff. Not to be insensitive, but wouldn't there be plenty of kunai and shuriken and stuff in here? Naruto asked, rubbing the back of his neck and waving the other hand around to encompass the entire Uchiha district. Sasuke growled, but didn't take offense. The Dobi was right after all. I don't know where anyone else stashed their weapons, and I didn't dig through my relatives' things. So now I don't know where they stashed them, and there's no time. And he took a deep breath, biting down on the rest of his potential babbling, hard. He would not show them how deeply this was affecting him. Unfortunately, they had gotten decent enough at reading his nonverbal cues to rescue him from awkward conversations, which meant they could tell something was wrong. Nay, whose room is this then? Naruto asked, nodding at the door. Their weapons in there. Yes, Sasuke said shortly, crossing his arms over his chest and glaring at the door. Naruto shot Sakura a baffled look, but the pink-haired girl apparently understood and she winced, saying quietly, That's Itachi's room. Isn't it? Sasuke didn't reply, but judging by Naruto's mumbled curse, that was enough to confirm it. Right, Naruto said brightly, fingers forming a familiar cross and the number of Narutos in his house jumping exponentially. It was mildly horrifying. We three get to the gate to wait for Sensei. These guys will gather shuriken and kunai. Need anything else, Sasuke? We can probably find more than enough in the district to get you through the mission without using any of that stuff, yeah. The gratitude he felt for that was nearly sickening, but the two idiots he was stuck with just waited for him to finally nod, before they bounded out of the house to get their packs and wait for him to exit. Meanwhile, clones darted through the compound, hollering to each other to coordinate their efforts, and already some were emerging from other houses with decent kunai and shuriken. Two of each? Naruto asked, Sasuke nodding, and then Naruto bellowed the request through the compound, various clones responding with, hi. Mind if they sort through other stuff? Naruto asked, and Sasuke hesitated. This was his family, but it had been years and he could barely walk through the entire compound without seizing. Maybe it would be better if he came back and all the useful supplies were already gathered without him hunting through bloodstained homes and jutsu-scarred streets to find them. His teammates, idiots, still watched him, waiting patiently, and finally he nodded. Naruto shouted to another clone, and then the three of them were off, racing over rooftops to get to the gate Sensei had directed them to with 10 minutes to spare. He very nearly tripped and fell on his face when he saw that Sensei was waiting for them. Asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk 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 page break asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk asterisk asterisk. This was working out far better than he had anticipated in even his wildest hopes. Kakashi had packed in a matter of moments. He kept mission-ready packs in his apartment at all times, so it was simple enough to seal away one of them in a scroll, and he even had the time to craft 3 more seals, so when his little genin earned it, he could seal away their packs too. He'd have to teach one of them seals, maybe Naruto. It was his legacy after all. Well, everyone could use the knowledge of storage seals. It was a damn shame so few people actually got into that study. He'd give them the basics and enough to save them some serious money when they got older and see if any of them took to it. And if Naruto did, maybe he could push harder for his mother's legacy. Anyway, being done so quickly meant he could go check on his students to make sure they were making decent progress. Sakura's new outfit was a pleasant surprise. He had been wondering how he'd be able to get her to stop with the red dress without getting dragged into clothing shopping with her. Horror of horrors. Naruto had packed food besides instant ramen, serious progress, and enough trapping equipment that Kakashi was mildly concerned for the fate of the rabbit population in their assigned area. Sasuke had been unfortunately timed. He could almost hear the boy's mental argument as he surveyed a low count of sound kunai and shuriken, picking through what were clearly inferior specimens and rejecting them. At least he was able to force himself to do that much. Watching him stand in front of Itachi's door had been surprisingly painful. Itachi's room had been picked through, the whole damned compound had been picked through, but everything in classified had been left where it was for the most part. It was Sasuke's property. He hadn't done much with it, not that Kakashi could blame him. It wasn't like he had entered the Hitaki clan compound outside of his annual inspection for the groundskeepers, but Itachi's room was clearly an entirely different battle. Just when Kakashi was about to go in and tell him he'd supply him with shuriken and kunai, Naruto and Sakura bounded up with their packs secured and started hassling him for being later than usual. He had listened into their conversation, and was this ringing sensation in his gut pride it had to be because they were learning and running with what he was teaching them. Holy shit, he had never thought they'd come together this fast. Maybe there was a chance. He left as soon as the clones arrived, feeling lighthearted and honestly hopeful for the first time since this disaster of a team had happened. They just might actually make it. Of course, he was so focused on how he was going to get them through this mission alive and safe and whole so they could continue to actually make it that he nearly forgot that he was technically early. He sighed as they came into view, realizing he had lost his streak. But Sasuke's near-face plant was totally worth it. Asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk 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 page break asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk asterisk asterisk. Through a complicated series of calculations done one night when he couldn't sleep, Naruto had determined that the majority of his recent good fortune could be traced back to the council that had pissed off Sensei and was one of the biggest dangers to his life right about now. Which meant that his anger at Theranos was being counteracted by the fact that thanks to them, his teammates were actually feeling kind of like teammates and their sensei was actually pushing them to be teammates, because he doubted this would have worked so well if there weren't the threat of political doom hanging over them, so he wouldn't be spending all his spare time coming up with a way to prank them. Though, maybe if he worded it right, he could sell it to Sensei as a team-building exercise. Sometimes, he impressed himself with his own brilliance. They were 2 hours out of Konoha, and probably a fair number of miles, given the pace Sensei was setting as they raced through the trees. He would bet that they'd continue this pace for 2 more hours, then either stop for a brief break and continue slower or stop for some training and not move any further today. Either way, 2 more hours would bring them to Sakura's edge as far as maintaining this pace went, but 4 hours of this run was nothing to scoff at, especially considering how shitty her endurance was just out of the academy. Of course, she was much better with tree running than he and Sasuke were, so she was probably expending less chakra, but she would still tire first. They just had greater reserves and endurance than her at the moment. Sure enough, 2 hours later she was seriously struggling to maintain the pace and Sensei dropped down to a more leisurely jog through the trees, rather than a panicked oh shit we're about to be eaten sprint. Though, judging by his complete and utter lack of being out of breath, Naruto had a sinking suspicion that their recent pace hadn't even been close to Sensei's actual oh shit we're about to be eaten sprint. Well then, they'd just have to get faster. When all of them had cooled down and regained their breathing patterns, he finally dropped down to a stroll, and then all the way to a stop in one particularly fine specimen of High no Kuni giant tree and sat down on a wide branch, waving them to take seats nearby. Sakura sat down further out on the same branch, quickly collapsing into her stretches. Sasuke jumped to a slightly higher branch and sat closer to Sensei and the main trunk, while Naruto decided to hang upside down from a branch across from the Tem. He needed all the chakra control practice he could get. Nay, Sensei, he asked, what's shore patrol like? Border patrol we got some lectures on, that I don't really remember. Sure like that, Sensei sighed, probably because Naruto admitted to not paying attention at the academy, again, but explained succinctly, shore patrol is a type of border patrol. Border patrol duties are to check on outposts, permanently manned and mothballed, and search for any undesirables. Bandits, pirates, smugglers, enemy ninja, the last are the most worrisome. Shore patrol, particularly along the wave stretch, is the least likely of all to encounter enemy shinobi. However, smugglers and pirates are a concern here, and we must be on watch for them. The more wealthy operations can hire missing nin, so stealth will be vital, as well as speed. Naruto nodded, walking around his branch so he was standing less entirely upside down. The blood rushing to his head was making it hard to concentrate. And the message delivery? When will we be doing that? Sakura asked, finishing her stretches and folding her legs under her to sit more comfortably. That will fall at the end of our shore patrol. Keitaro is a port town which has the most dealings with wave and concludes the section we've been assigned. We're going to the far end of the shore, closer to Noodles, then cutting up and over to Keitaro. That mission, Sakura, will be yours to plan and execute. Sakura-chan looked startled, then determined, a much more dramatic expression with her scar. Seeing her scar brought up another concern of his, and Sakura's scar. How are we going to explain that? Sensei gave his evil eye smirk and said, I don't know Naruto. That's your job to figure out. Well damn. Ask a question, get the answer you seriously don't want. Sakura was eyeing him suspiciously so he beamed at her, reassuring, don't worry Sakura-chan. I'll make the story something epic. Dobi. Sasuke snorted, smirk on his face reassuring. Naruto hadn't liked the shaky Sasuke he and Sakura had stumbled on in the Uchiha compound, and really hadn't liked the quietly, disturbingly grateful Sasuke that had emerged after his offer to search for kunai and shuriken. Thankfully for their status quo and his own peace of mind, after a clone had bounded up with 2 pouches of each weapon, the Uchiha had regained his equilibrium and they started their first C rank with familiar jibes and taunts. It would have been weird without them. Not so fast Sasuke, Sensei sing-songed, it was creepy. He always did that when it was something deviously awful that was coming. Could anyone blame them that they cringed and leaned away from the man? No, no one could at all. You, my dear student, get to plan out 3 potential ambushes, 1 for small-time smugglers, 1 for active pirates, let's say 3 ships, and 1 for land-based bandits. Missing nin included, of course. I'll pick some from the bingo book for you. Sasuke groaned and Naruto wanted to cackle. He had definitely gotten the best end of the deal here. Score for Uzumaki. Of course, that meant he'd get the crappily complicated assignment next time, but he'd savor his victory while he could. The others would do the same, after all. Dobi. We need to trip up that one with the tattooed face. Right. Throw this 3 feet to the left of him. Sakura. This 2 feet behind. Hit the deck hard. Simultaneous throws on my mark. 1 2 3 mark. 2 kunai flew with remarkable accuracy towards the pirate and hit their targets near perfectly. Thankfully, Naruto's traps never really needed to be perfectly accurate for them to work. Impact explosive tags he'd recently learned to make distracted him enough that the shadow clones leaping out from the follow-up kunais Naruto had thrown were able to knock him out and hog-tie him. Kakashi Ichi, one of 2 shadow clones the Junin had made for this encounter, kept an eye on the brats. They were staying out of this one for the most part. They had come across a pirate crew led by a Nukenin of Mist, in the midst of a raid on one of Hino Kuni's merchant fleets. The escort shinobi had managed to do some damage, but the Nukenin that commanded the crew had recruited a few others of like minds and skills to join up, and the Chunin weren't really a match for 5 Chunin or higher opponents. He hadn't heard anything about this level of piracy on the coast. Either the ships had just moved into Hino Kuni waters or heads were going to roll in the intelligence department. Their water walking had gotten plenty of practice on their 4 days of peaceful shore patrol, the waves and swells of the ocean taking a bit of work. He also had the memory of the first time they saw the ocean saved with his Sharingan. If only he could figure out a way to take a photo of a memory, he was certain the Yamanakas could help him come up with something if he actually trusted people inside his brain, because the slack jaws and utter awe were adorable. He had also managed to catch Naruto's first encounter with a sea urchin and Sakura's face when she was double dog dared into sticking her tongue in a small anemone. He was sure Obito would approve this sort of use for his eye, indelibly etching things besides kills and slaughters into his mind made for a nice change. As they were patrolling, one of Naruto's Radius clones had dispelled and alerted them to this little fight going on, and Sasuke had pulled out his plan for multi-Nukenin pirates and Kakashi had approved its implementation. The kids hadn't lost their brutal honesty for self-evaluation, making the plan feasible. Some flaws, but nothing that would necessarily get them killed if they were exploited, so he felt no compunctions about having a shadow clone watch over them while he himself went after the Nukenin in charge. If any of those flaws were exploited, it would be a valuable teaching experience. So here they were, hiding in a poorly secured lifeboat, flaw 1 under a mild nothing to see here genjutsu Sakura had learned the second day of their mission, sort of flaw, and sabotaging the people they could to give the Konoha nin an edge that they sorely needed. Kakashi himself and Kakashi ni were taking care of the commanding Nukenin and his second-in-command, respectively. Kakashi ni was actually aiding the Chunin commander from the B-rank escort mission, who was dealing with the second-in-command. A high Chunin verging on Junin rank, if Kakashi were to guess. A little easy to goad, and not enough skill to back it up. Right now it was just a waiting game for an opening that was actually exploitable without self-sacrifice. Now the Nukenin that Kakashi himself was dealing with actually seemed a competent Junin and very well versed in water techniques and shipboard fighting, giving him the homeground advantage. He also didn't seem to particularly care about collateral damage, oddly enough. There might be valuable information on this ship that he wouldn't want to have fall into their hands, not something that could be moved or was worth money, otherwise he wouldn't want it destroyed, but something that was dangerous to leave around where they could access it. Naruto, he said, the genin looking over at him briefly, hi sensei. Make a couple clones and have them sneak aboard and get below decks. I want to know what sort of information they have, read what documents you can and dispel, if you can't get them out. If you can secure them and we manage to secure the ship, all the better, but just in case, read some first. What are we looking for? Naruto asked, brow furrowed, Sakura glancing over at him and biting her lower lip. Bad habit that, stop that Sakura, If you get startled, you'll bite through your own lip, and that is just as painful as it sounds, trust me. She quickly released her lip and said, "Hi sensei." Before turning back to the watching the fight with Sasuke. Kakashi then answered Naruto, "You want to keep an eye out for things regarding where they were last, if they're receiving orders from anyone, if they're in correspondence with people. How did they know this convoy was here? Is this his only ship? Things like that." "Right. I'll do my best," Naruto said, clearly somewhat dubious, but he made a total of 5 clones that darted through the fights in henges of various forms. The crab was ingenious, and quickly made it below decks. One jumped off the side and squeezed through a porthole. Nice flexibility demonstration. Kakashi Ichi just nodded and sat back against the stern again, returning the majority of his focus to his students' participation in the fight, while a side focus was in reading his marvelous text. He'd caught up on Ika, and with eidetic memory, even without the Sharingan, it wasn't worth rereading it as much as he always seemed to. Instead, he kept the jackets and put them on similarly sized books. This one was a recent find from the Hokage's personal library before he'd been assigned Team 7, a bribe, he was sure. Well, he wasn't going to say no to incentives like this. The affinity enhancement and growth techniques and theories described here were fascinating and utterly new to him. Oh, there went the second in command. Lovely. And there went the Chunin commander to chakra exhaustion. Sigh. Naruto, ally evac, over there, Sakura pointed, Naruto nodding and adding another 2 clones to the count, and they didn't bother with subtlety. Well, they did. One hanged into Sasuke, simply blitzing over to the downed Chunin and grabbing him before jumping off the side of the ship to land on the waves, running towards one of the merchant ships the pirates had never had a chance to reach, the Sasuke clone deflecting kunai and shuriken as if he really were an Uchiha. Something to investigate. He turned the page, watching with quite a bit of self-satisfied contentment as his students took down another pirate via distraction while a Chunin dealt the final blow. They were doing quite nicely, and had yet to make a direct kill between the 3 of them, though he didn't know what Naruto's shadow clones were doing. Note, deal with that later, so he didn't have to be stuck with that counseling job just yet. Seemed the pirates were panicking. Oh, another Nukenin down. Not a surprise really, the man relied entirely on earth techniques and they were on the ocean, gave him little to work with. Probably was in charge of hiding their goodies, especially if they went the stereotypical bury a stash on an island route. Ah, Kakashi himself and Kakashi ni had gotten the head down, at last. Dead it seemed, rather than captured for interrogation. Unfortunate, but with the ship still intact and Naruto clones swarming for data, they would hopefully get some answers. There went the rest of the crew, and some even surrendered peacefully. More chances for answers. For the usual first-time C-rank complication, this wasn't so bad. Seeing as he was no longer needed, he could dispel at will. 3 Kakashis was a little much after all. Kakashi himself blinked, memories from his first shadow clone merging and meshing with his own quickly and efficiently. He had a lot of practice at it, after all. Another blink, and his second clone's memories were assimilated as well. There was that done. Hatake Senpai. The ranking Chunin nodded shortly, prisoners secured. Excellent. Genin. He called, giving them the approach caution sign he'd pounded into their heads even more over the past few days. 1 day of communicating in nothing but hand signs had made them very creatively metaphorical. Sakura released her genjutsu before the genin jumped onto the deck, and Kakashi was smugly dissatisfied with the wide-eyed look on the 3 remaining Chunin's faces. Really, they were in the middle of a melee battle with Nukenin, and they couldn't detect a genjutsu concealing something on a lifeboat. That was going to get them killed one day. May I introduce my genin team? Kakashi said formally as they walked over. Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto, Team 7, assigned shore patrol on the wave stretch when we spotted the fight out here and came to reinforce Konoha. Our thanks, the senior bowed slightly, splitting his attention between Kakashi and his children. I'm Watanabe Keigo, these two are Byaku Ichigo and Yuryu Renji. Our commander is Natsu Yamato, I believe he was evacuated. He's on the main merchant ship receiving medical treatment from their shipboard doctor, just chakra exhaustion and some minor stuff, Naruto supplied, Kakashi nodding and asking, lower decks clear. There was a flickering across his eyes, damn. He had killed down there then. Not sure, sensei. Only have a couple clones left in there, searching the office. There were, he hesitated, casting an uneasy glance at his teammates, Sakura in particular, and unfortunately, he had a feeling he knew exactly what sort of cargo was giving him trouble. Odd cargoes, Kakashi supplied, Naruto's quick grateful look noted by his teammates but not commented on, they'd corner him later, he was sure. Hi sensei, odd cargoes. You three will guard the prisoners, Watanabe-san, do any of you know how to operate this rig? Hi, especially with jutsus. Two of us can manage it for short distances. We're not going anywhere, we're dropping anchor. The merchant rigs aren't damaged and at risk of sinking. I want two of you to go over there and relay a message that the fight is over and we would appreciate assistance bringing these criminals into port so they can face lawful repercussions for their actions and appropriate reparations can be made. Kakashi ordered, making his orders a little more in depth than he normally would so his genin would understand what was going on, and so the men and one woman, interesting, would sweat. Hi Hataki-san, at once. Byaku-san, with me. The two Chunin quickly dropped the anchor and vanished over the side. Anything I can help with, Hataki-san? Yuryu Renji asked, raising his hand slightly with a wry smile. Afraid I'm the newbie on this run, at least so far as ships go. Cut my teeth near K's no Kuni, bit of a different environment. Kakashi snorted, that was something of an understatement, even if Rivers was along that stretch. But it meant he might have picked up some wind jutsus, and while he knew quite a few thanks to his eye and his sensei, there might be some new ones, and more importantly some basic ones, that he could steal for Naruto. Something to think about later. Biting on his thumb and flashing through seals, Pakun and Bull appeared in a billow of smoke, the two Ninken shaking themselves and looking around curiously. What's up, boss? Pakun asked, looking at the bound pirates in disdain. Need help taking out the trash? Not this time, Pakun, at least not yet, Kakashi chuckled. Need you to keep an eye on them and my brats with Bull while Yuryu-san and I clear the holds of the ship. You spawned. Kami save us all, Pakun said dryly, Naruto indignantly crying, hey. Even while Sakura smacked him and Sasuke gave a sigh that spoke volumes. The boy was talented. Ma, no. These are my little genin minions. Uzumaki Naruto, Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura, you three, these are two of my Ninken, we'll have to introduce you to the others at some point. Pakun's the pug with good smelling fur and soft paws, Bull's the big guy that's great at intimidation. Yo! Both dogs said in unison, waving their paws in imitations of hellos. Sakura looked about ready to explode at cuteness, so Kakashi quickly collected Yuryu and left. Those two didn't look like much, even Bull, to a shinobi's eyes, but they were entirely capable of taking down Junin-level opponents and had in fact run up to A-rank missions on their own when he was particularly slammed in Anbu solos. He may at teaching humans, but give him puppies and he'd make a viciously loyal and intelligent team that could by Kami get the job done. Took a bit longer, since he had to raise them from puppyhood, but hey, they were much easier to understand than people. So, not that I don't trust your Ninken, but is leaving them up there with no higher ranked shinobi a good idea? Yuryu asked bluntly, following him down into the hold with a pair of kunai in hand. Kakashi was listening carefully for anyone. It was hard to detect by smell in this reeking mess of humanity, sea salt and tar, but still answered, "My team can handle them, maybe," thanked Kami for dogs, and Naruto reported slaves. Ah, Yuryu nodded, apparently figuring that Kakashi was one of those Junin sensei who tried to shelter his team as much as possible. Not really, but yes really. He just couldn't afford to shelter them as much as that type of sensei stereotypically did. They couldn't afford it if they wanted to live, and they did, and he wanted them to as well, so there you had it. He couldn't shelter them that much. But he'd take what he could get. One inexpertly killed pirate sprawled across the gangway, check. Another shoved into a broken beam and impaled. Still twitching, a slash across the neck took care of that one. Various signs of chaos and destruction made it easy enough to find the office Naruto had been talking about. It was a fairly spacious room for a ship. 3 small portholes along the side looked like the merchant ships were drawing closer, and had papers all over the place, 2 clones sorting through it all. It was also where the would-be pirate lord spent the majority of his time, evidenced by the bed that took up half of the room and the rather attractive concubine that took up half the bed. She was a classical beauty, out of tea if he had to guess, and had an admirable sense of poise. Despite 2 identical genin sorting through her former employer's things, she was draped over cushions with a very deliberately placed robe covering the most essential of her assets and drinking tea. "Ah, Shinobi-san," she gave a demure smile, Kakashi acknowledging another professional with a nod. "I suppose Nakika-san is dead then." "A shame. He had yet to pay me in full. Ma, if you can produce your contract and we can find his stash, we can probably come to some sort of severance agreement," Kakashi shrugged. It was a standard practice for Konoha, kept people from feeling cheated out of their paychecks and souring relations. Besides, these sorts usually kept extra money around so they seldom came up short. But he had more important things to worry about right now. The woman could clearly take care of herself. "Naruto," he nodded to his student, approaching the one that actually looked up at him, sitting cross-legged on top of the late Nakikaze's desk. "What have you found?" "It's weird, sensei," Naruto Ichi said, rubbing the back of his head. "Most of the maps are for Wave itself, but we're a little south for that, I think. And there's some coded correspondence, but I hate codes, so I just put that aside for your Sakura-chan. And then there's his bookkeeping, and he had like 3 books all that had different numbers, and that's what he's working on. And then it looks like he has agreements with someone based on the repetition in the books, and there's some sort of pattern in these log entries as to targets, but I just can't figure it. Oh, and this is Momoko-san, she's pretty cool." Kakashi raised an eyebrow at the clearly adopted name, while Yuryu actually choked. Naruto either didn't get the pun or didn't think it was that funny. Oddly, he couldn't decide which side was more likely. "Well done, Naruto. Now, the unusual cargoes. I assume they are not so willingly or well treated as Momoko-san." "No," Naruto Ichi winced. "I've got 3 trying to make them more comfortable. We found keys and stuff. Most of them apparently haven't been stuck down there for long. It's a recent raid or whatever you call it. So, there's that, I guess. Fortunately, Nakika's wasn't much, but he was a businessman," Momoko said coolly, sitting up and casually dropping her robe to don mildly more appropriate garb. Naruto flushed and looked away. Kakashi just gave a critical once-over and ignored her, and if he wasn't mistaken, Yuryu was ogling. Idiot would be eaten alive if this was his self-control. Meaning he treated his cargo relatively well, Kakashi explained to Naruto, who looked slightly nauseous at the idea of treating humans as cargo, but he was holding up rather well all things considered. "Unlikely we'll be dealing with the usual liberties taken by crews then. It happened once, Momoko gave an icy smile. I was permitted to castrate them. Do you have ambitions for violence? Kakashi asked mildly. Yuryu shuddered. It was a near automatic reaction for most males at the mention of castration, oddly enough, and she returned it with a cool disdain, replying, please. I desire comfort with occasional dashes of excitement. Repeated violence is far too much work. Good. He hadn't read her wrong. He'd met women and one man like her before, and while he didn't understand their lifestyle, it was what they chose and they were damn good at it. He could respect someone with that sort of dedication to their life's work, especially since they, too, were viewed as less than human by most everyday people. Then we may be able to come to an agreement, he replied, and Momoko snapped her fan open in front of her face, saying coyly, I look forward to it. Kindly stay here for the time being, Kakashi said shortly, one of you, with me. Yuryu. One look at the man told Kakashi he wasn't going to be much good on this one. Been at sea a little too long, or just very susceptible to women. That was going to go into his report, most definitely. Oh, could he stay here? Momoko asked, a breathless tremor in her voice, expertly faked. He would have rolled his eye, but it was too much effort. I'd feel so much better if a brave strong shinobi were here to keep me safe. It was a good thing Yuryu's back was to him, because he was unable to prevent casting her a disbelieving look, that was laying it on a little thick, oh for Kami's sake. I'll gladly stay behind, Hitaki-senpai, if that is what you order, of course, Yuryu was thinking with his little head. Would serve him right if she were some man-eating monster that clipped it for him, unprofessional idiot. Even Naruto was giving him an, are you kidding? Look, Naruto. The boy who still wore neon orange pants. Fine, Kakashi said shortly, Naruto's, all of you with me. The door shut behind them, two Narutos carrying the encoded letters and the accounting books, good forethought, and Naruto Ichi saying, she's gonna eat him alive. Hopefully not literally, Kakashi replied dryly, two with the books, go up to the main deck, greet the other Chunin, because they should be here right now, and send some of the merchant's crew down to help bring the people up to the main deck. Get some shelter set up or something. And Yuryu-san and Momoko-san? Naruto Ichi asked, the other two darting off. Oh, I'm sure they'll be just fine. Asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk 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 page break asterisk 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 equals 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 asterisk asterisk asterisk. That evening found Team 7 on the liberated pirate ship with some of the merchant crew sailing the vessel with the rest of the little convoy. The slaves had been freed and scattered to the other ships, a Chunin on each taking care of information gathering on that front. They'd found the money stash and records quickly enough once the boat was cleared and the actual prisoners secured. Seals, had to love them, and with any luck the bounties on the pirates would be enough to cover a bit for each of the freed slaves and get them somewhat on their feet. Meh, not his problem anymore. He had enough to deal with between his students and ensuring Momoko-san was dealt with properly before they left to finish their patrol. She had requested to stay on board this vessel so she could pack and, as she'd technically not done anything illegal, and technically was an indentured servant and slave in all but name and reality, she wasn't going to be prosecuted for anything. The contract she'd pulled up and they'd found a copy of was a masterpiece, truly. He was keeping the copy for posterity. Concubine aside, he had to debrief his baby Genin. They were up on the highest deck, sleeping bags set up and the three in a circle with their heads together, so they could pretend to secretly whisper to each other in the middle of the night. Seriously, it was kind of annoying, but right now the three were just sitting there on top of their bedrolls and playing some form of card game. All right, you three up for a debrief? Kakashi asked rhetorically, sitting down and resting his back against the hull of the ship, the three turning to face him and giving some sign of assent. Sakura. Report. She stammered a bit, had some awkward pauses, but overall, a solid first combat report. She seemed a little shaky, probably finally coming off the adrenaline high, but still rather solid. Good. One down. Sasuke came next, and he was very composed, almost entirely professional. A few slips here and there gave away his jitters though. First combat was always a bit of a dicey one, but overall, good. Helped that he and Sakura didn't directly fight, not really, they plotted and ambushed. Made things a little easier, good. He was easing them into this shinobi business, even if they were sent out weeks too early on this mission. Now Naruto's, that was the one he really needed to hear. Followed the others rather well, though a bit disjointed thanks to his ridiculous use of Kage Bunshin. He might need to come up with an entirely separate reporting style to make sense of all that simultaneous input. At the very least he'd need to work on coherently reporting it. Kakashi understood it because he understood the problem, but if this were written out as spoken other readers would be confused beyond belief. Turns out he'd killed 5, counting the one that he'd left twitching that Kakashi had finished off, but Naruto had thought he'd been dead, so the response was the same as if he had finished the job. No need to tell him he'd left a pirate to suffer. Sakura and Sasuke were both uneasy at that report in their own ways. Sakura was pale-faced and staring at her hands. Sasuke was grimly blank and staring into the distance, eyes dark. While they hadn't killed personally, they'd watched people die as a result of their interference and were now hearing about the results of individual combat from their teammate, a peer in age and relative maturity. You two, go spar on the water for a bit, Pakun will go with you, Kakashi said, the pug grumbling but getting up off his pillow and following the two genin briskly enough. Kakashi could give a whistle and Pakun would hustle them back, and could relay any potential breakdowns Kakashi would have to deal with aside from the, yay first blood speech. So, Naruto, how are you feeling? Kakashi winced, that was the worst opener ever. He knew that from all his experience as a shinobi, but how else did you open that line of conversation? Well, besides a rough, congratulations you're officially an adult now, which he didn't think would go over well. It hadn't exactly gone over well when he gave that speech to Rin, though not as badly as his attempt at reassurance when she'd stared at him in horror. In hindsight, don't worry, you'll get down the technique to kill them fast so they don't spasm so much soon enough, hadn't exactly been reassuring. But at least it had been honest. Kind of gross, Naruto mumbled, I mean, yeah. It's our job, and they were clearly jerks. But, we're trying the rest of these guys, right? Maybe it would have been better, that way. Kakashi hummed to stall for time, saying carefully, well, given the laws of Fire Country regarding slavery and piracy, quite a few of these pirates are going to be sentenced to death. So because they would have died anyway, it's okay. Naruto asked, voice surprisingly sardonic. Ma, just something to consider a comfort in this case, Kakashi shrugged, continuing bluntly, you won't have that all the time, Naruto. The blonde flinched, looking away before he nodded slightly, yeah. I get that, but, it's not, I mean, they were fast, I didn't have time to really think about it, but that last guy with the people there was, I could have stopped them. But, I didn't. Did you enjoy it? Watching? Kakashi asked bluntly, because that death hadn't exactly been an easy one. Not the hardest he'd seen, not even close, but harder than the gut skewer he'd finished. No, Naruto cried, aghast, it just didn't seem my place, to tell them to stop, you know. I mean, I'd killed those other guys, and they'd been the ones hurt by them, so, why shouldn't they get to finish that guy? It was gross, sensei. It was nasty. Don't tell him he'll see worse soon enough, Genin. Remember. Baby Genin, Kakashi reminded himself, saying finally, "Okay. Naruto, listen. This is important." The genin looked up at him, blue eyes suspiciously shiny. "No tears please sweet merciful Kami, no tears." And Kakashi was careful to meet his eyes as best he could while he said, "You'll remember these men. You'll remember them for the rest of your life. Others might blur together, might grow indistinct, but from everyone I've spoken to, you remember your first. What you need to remind yourself of is this: first, you were in combat. They were going to try to kill you. They struck some killing blows on your clones, didn't they? And they thought your clones were really you." Naruto nodded. Good, he was thinking still. Second, everyone dies. There's no avoiding that. What we do is no crime against nature. The act of dying is natural. Got that? Another nod. Right, that was the thank God it was a combat kill bit, then the natural laws revulsion bit. Now what was he missing? Better luck on quick kills next time. At least you didn't have to kill any kids, just wait till you get to my age. No, bad sensei. What is also natural is to feel some satisfaction in it, it's simple instinct. You are alive, your opponent is dead, of course you're going to be satisfied, be pleased. Satisfaction in surviving, in a job well done, does not make you a monster. Naruto perked up at that, a little twitch of interest. Aha. He'd found the problem. It makes you human, he said, leaning in slightly and resting a hand on Naruto's shoulder. It makes you human, Naruto-kun. The problem comes when your first instinct is to kill, when you seek to kill outside the mission, off the field, because you enjoy it. And even then, it is manageable, with help. Best stop there. He didn't need to talk about the sociopath management program all shinobi villages had. Enough that Naruto knew he wasn't a monster, of course that's what he had been worried about, with the Kyuubi revealed so recently, and knew that there was help there. Should he ever go down that path, oh please no, not Naruto, not Sensei's son. Naruto leaned into the contact, Kakashi hesitating briefly before shifting his arm entirely around the boy's shoulders, tugging him into his side. Naruto tensed for a moment but quickly sagged against him, not trembling, thank Kami, just taking the comfort offered. All things considered, that had gone rather well. Now for the other two. Why had he ever agreed to this? Damn you Sandaime-sama. Asterisk 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 equals asterisk 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 page break asterisk 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 equals asterisk asterisk asterisk. That we couldn't just catch a lift with the ships, Naruto grumbled, glowering at the ever smaller ships in question the next morning. Ma, we need to finish our mission, Naruto, Kakashi replied, reading through the coded messages he had taken from the stash. They were tucked into the pages of his book, of course, he had a reputation to maintain. It was tantalizingly familiar, and he had gotten a tip from Momoko-san before they departed this morning. Apparently, Yuryu's unprofessionalism had not won the team any points with the concubine. An impressive woman, truly. Only 3 more days. Sakura chirped, nudging Naruto with her elbow. She'd been much more comfortable with initiating contact with him since Kakashi had sat all 3 of them down for a little chat about kills, 1 down, 2 to go. She was taking to the supportive teammate role with gusto. Bravo, Sakura-chan. Keep it coming. And besides, didn't you want to see some more tide pools? Maybe there'll be a sea cucumber in the next ones. Kakashi chuckled at the suddenly renewed enthusiasm on Naruto's part, the boy pelting after Sasuke with a challenging whoop and the Uchiha answering with a glower before picking up the pace, Sakura racing after them with an indignant shout to wait up. For a morning after, this wasn't bad. This wasn't bad at all. His good mood had soured by the time they'd finished for the day, an early finish, barely mid-afternoon, because they'd found a beach with truly magnificent tide pools and he was feeling generous. The reason for his bad mood? Oh, nothing much. He'd simply broken the code on those letters and found that a merchant powerhouse was working to take over Wave and use it as a power base for all sorts of less than legal and, even worse, unauthorized operations all along the Hino Kuni shoreline and even further inland. Geitu Corporation, even he, shinobi focused as he was, had heard of that civilian powerhouse, and now it seemed that the little rat was going to be trying his hand at the management of a nation. And piss poor management at that. What sort of labor pool did he expect if he was selling off all the people as slave labor and making them miserable? Easier to be feared than loved, but in the long term, far less profitable. If he were on his own, right now would be the perfect time to execute one of his independently organized solo missions and kill the man, clear out his accounts and leave the entire country of Wave gratefully indebted to Konoha while bringing in a killer profit margin. But he had 3 baby genin with him, so his right to spontaneously accept or craft profitable missions for Konoha thanks to the Sandame's trust was rightly waived. But the potential, sensei, Sakura called, waving him over to a tide pool, a brilliant smile on her face. Sensei, look. A trapped fish. He obediently came over and peered into the pool, and she was right, there was indeed a trapped fish. Given her obsessive reading material this past week, he knew just what she was going to ask and he preempted her, nodding and saying, "Go for it, Sakura-chan." Good initiative. She beamed, crouching down and clearly anchoring herself with chakra to the rocks, reaching in to catch the fish in a flash. Good reflexes too. Such improvement. He kept her struggles with the fish in his peripheral vision while he scanned for Naruto and Sasuke. It seemed they were hunting for dinner. Momoko-san had mentioned that sea urchins were marvelous delicacies and they'd decided they wanted to try it, after Kakashi had confirmed that yes, sea urchins were, in fact, edible with the right preparation. Not that he really knew the proper preparation beyond the basics of not poisoning yourself, but hey. It'd be an adventure. Had to be better than those blasted mountain scrabblers from Nami no Kuni. They had 2 days until they reached town and concluded their shore patrol mission. Tomorrow they'd be checking on an outpost, which would have messenger hawks, given distance. If he sent an urgent intelligence update to the Hokage, they'd hopefully have a reply waiting for them in Keiharu port so he would be able to get instruction as to how to deal with Geitu and the slavery ring they'd disrupted. There were quite a few things that the hidden villages tolerated that were abhorrent and disgusting to civilians, both in and out of government. Slavery was not one of them. Brainwashing and child killers on the other hand, well, for the greater good, nay. Mentally dismissing that particular line of thought, he turned in time to catch Sakura's whoop of success with her resurrected fish full on, headband sliding aside as his Sharingan gleamed. Precious memories, he had learned, lessened the burden of memory the Sharingan enforced. Had he been allowed to submit his theories to the Uchiha, he would have suggested activating the Sharingan in pleasurable and amusing situations with an at least 1:3 ratio for mission activations, particularly those involving kills or other traumatic situations. Needless to say, he had not ever been able to present this recommendation. Though now that the Uchiha were gone, there was no telling what he could suggest to his little student. Something to consider. Once his Sharingan was activated. If Sasuke didn't manage it on this mission, he might have to request some Anbu assistance in the matter, because if he didn't arrange it directly, he wasn't breaking his word to the brats to not set a foreign nin on them, nor was he violating the implicit promise that he wouldn't set domestic nin on them either, unless they committed a crime. Also, they were surprisingly good at reading body language and responding to it. If he wasn't genuinely surprised by the incident in question, he couldn't guarantee that their subconscious wouldn't register that as off, which could cause problems down the road. Problems he most certainly didn't need. Nay, sensei, Naruto bellowed, sprinting across the sand, and not sinking in at all. Excellent. They'd adapted their chakra control exercises to the environment. We have 6 sea urchins each, that should be enough to sample, right? Ma. Sounds like plenty. Naruto. Kakashi agreed. Now congratulate your teammate, she's done her first successful Iryo Jutsu. Wahoo! Go Sakura-chan! Naruto whooped, beaming at her and bounding up to stare at the flopping fish. That's so awesome. Hey, Sasuke Tem, check out what Sakura-chan did. Even the Uchiha agreed it was impressive and congratulated her, if with less bouncing around and gleeful whoops of how utterly badass she now was. Judging by the brilliant smile and pleased flush on Sakura's face, both her teammates' responses were more than appreciated. Which meant she'd work that much harder at Iryo Jutsu, and if she combined that with the genjutsus she was getting a taste for, she would make a lovely infiltrator assassin when she was older, in multiple senses of the word. That's enough, kids. Let's calm down now, or do you not want to learn anything new today? Kakashi suppressed a snicker as they all immediately quieted down and assembled in front of him, balanced on water-slick rocks as the waves crashed around them. Between Sakura's struggling fish and the boys' arms of sea urchins, they looked like baby humanin. Sharingan photo op, and Sasuke twitched, going wide-eyed at the sight of his family's dojutsu. Score. Sensei. Is that a Sharingan? He asked, clearly only just managing to not stumble over his words entirely. Hi, Kakashi replied, looking over at him with bemused confusion. This was a little surprising after all, did you not know I had one? No, sensei, I didn't, Sasuke replied stiffly, and Kakashi sighed, rolling his uncovered eye to the heavens in a mock prayer for patience, supplemented with a real one, because one could always use a little more patience. Anyo, the Sharingan is the Uchiha bloodline dojutsu, correct? Sakura asked, fish now deposited back in its tide pool. And, isn't Sasuke the last one? Last one worth mentioning, at least, Naruto corrected, nudging Sasuke with his foot, Sakura nodding agreement. He is, Kakashi agreed, they had a lovely way of putting it after all. I received this one from a teammate who was dying to replace the one I lost helping him. Obito. I won't fail your cousin, not again, not this time, he vowed, watching the three exchange glances and the other two flank their shaken teammate protectively. Barely over a month, and they were already doing so well, it was incredible. He was either a really good teacher, or they were just a really brilliant bunch. He knew which one he was laying his money on. Well, this is awkward, Kakashi rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, right? Let's get settled at the campsite and I'll explain, nay. They quietly followed him up to where he'd deposited their stuff with a Naruto clone as a sentry, the clone dispelling the moment they came into sight and Naruto relaying, nothing happened, sensei. Thank you, Naruto, he acknowledged, taking a seat by his pack and lounging against it, the genin dumping their sea urchins in a pile in front of him and clustering around it. For prepping those, you split them open, scoop out the soft insides, and cook that, he informed them, pointing at the pile. Sakura nodded and pulled out his flat pan. She'd quite happily taken over cooking and he was quite happy to let her. She was much better at it than he was, apparently cooking at home was her prime bonding time with her mother. Naruto and Sasuke agreeably started splitting open sea urchins with their kunai, surprisingly not turning it into a race. They wanted to hear this explanation then, good. They could put aside their rivalry for a common, relatively minor goal. Uchiha Obito was my teammate, along with a Nohara Rin, Kakashi explained, deciding to give them a very, very abbreviated version of what had happened. If they were really interested, he might tell them more later. Much later. On a mission where I had command during the Third War, Rin was captured. During the course of rescuing her, Obito activated his Sharingan for the first time. I lost my left eye and one of the enemy nin triggered a cave-in and Obito shoved me out of the way of collapsing rock and was crushed. Kakashi inhaled deeply and continued as casually as he could. He wasn't killed immediately and requested that Rin, a medic herself, transplant his left Sharingan eye into my eye socket. Eye for an eye, and then he'd get to see the world even after he passed. There was some conflict with the Uchiha clan over whether I would keep his eye, but it was decided that Obito's dying wish would be respected, though there was always some tension regarding it. That is why I am surprised it was never mentioned to you. Sasuke, your father was, rather vocal, in accusing me of line theft. Sasuke flinched slightly at the mention of his father, but nodded slowly. I see his point. But other Uchiha have left their eyes to relatives before. If the transplant held, it showed you were worthy of the honor. And now, that's why you were picked as our sensei. One of multiple reasons, Kakashi agreed, the main one, and the main reason that the council gave me that blasted order. Ing asshats, Naruto grumbled, before perking up. Hey sensei, I had an idea for team training. Raising an eyebrow at the shift in tone, Kakashi asked, oh. Yeah, Naruto gave a grin that was unnerving in its potential for sheer chaos. Prank the council. It'd give us a good background for future sabotage and espionage missions, and depending on the prank an argument could be made that they give us experience in things like assassination, trap building and escape and evasion, all at the same time. He flung his shelled sea urchin in the air, a beaming grin on his face. Come on sensei, it's genius. It is a good point, Sakura agreed virtuously, the innocent air she projected utterly ruined by the gleam in her eyes. It would be a good exercise, I think, sensei. Sasuke, HN, was enough of a response. The interested smirk on his face confirmed his interest. Kakashi wanted to laugh, because how utterly Uzumaki of the boy. He didn't see why not, but he saw no reason they wouldn't have to work for it. We'll need to run it by the Hokage, but in the meantime, scheme away. Kakashi shrugged. Just know if you are caught, I disown all responsibility and you will pay your time however the authorities deem fit. So, like an off-the-book mission? Sasuke asked slyly. Naruto whooping and Sakura stifling a giggle. Kakashi let a chuckle escape at that, leaning back against his pack contentedly. Any thoughts of learning something new from him vanished as they started debating just what they should do and which members they should target, or if they should go for broke and prank the whole place. Politics, infiltration, sabotage, traps and sheer, unadulterated audacity. Team building indeed.